Chapter 1297. On the huge green list, the final ranking was revealed. The first name was extremely eye-catching. How could it be Chu Mu? How is this possible? A series of absent-minded cries of surprise revealed the shock and disbelief in their hearts. Shouldn't it be Gu Luankong? How could he be second? Gu Luankong's cultivation was high and he was extremely talented. He was recognized as the number one on the Heaven Youth list. However, in the end, he was only second. The number one spot was taken by Chu Mu. They all knew that Chu Mu was a genius who had broken through to the early stage of the second sky of Nirvana realm. However, he was able to take the number one spot. What did that mean? It meant that Chu Mu had defeated Gu Luankong. It meant that although Chu Mu's cultivation wasn't as high as Gu Luankong's, he was more powerful than Gu Luankong. For a moment, many people felt as if their hearts were being scratched by a cat. They really wanted to see what had happened and what the fight between Chu Mu and Gu Luankong was like. I didn't expect Chu Mu to take the number one spot. Is the Heavenly Sword Hall finally going to rise again after being silent for so many years? A great emperor sighed. The great emperors could see through the starry sky and see the result. Before the sword god had fallen, the Heavenly Sword Hall was undoubtedly the most prosperous human race. There were countless geniuses and the other forces couldn't be compared to them. Even the descendants of some top great emperors could only compete with them. They couldn't surpass them. That era belonged to the Heavenly Sword Hall. However, after the sword god had fallen, the Heavenly Sword Hall had gradually declined in all aspects. Chu Mu's talent is indeed rare. However, he shouldn't be too different from Gu Luankong. He might have been lucky to take the number one spot this time. Sometimes, luck is also a kind of strength. The discussion about Chu Mu started. Just as the human race's 4 great star regions were about to unleash a storm named Chu Mu, the final moment of the Heavenly Youth List competition had arrived. The 100 freakish geniuses were seated on the seats of honor. The Heavenly Azure ranking appeared in the air above the 100 godly mountains, as well as the crowd. It was like a river of stars, illuminating the ages. The 100 names on the Heaven Azure roll were so dazzling. The gazes of countless people gathered on the Tianqing leaderboard. It was as if they had traveled through time and space to gather here. Envy, surprise, excitement. The people of the 5 Elements Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sword Hall were overjoyed. Chu Mu winning first place made them so excited that they almost fainted. The next step was called the Blessing of Providence. Fighting for a ranking on the Heaven Azure leaderboard, other than fighting against the monstrous geniuses of the same generation, the greater purpose was to obtain the providence of the Heaven Azure leaderboard. The Heaven Azure leaderboard was a special treasure known as the Secret Treasure of Providence. It carried a huge amount of power of providence. The power of providence had always existed within the Heaven Azure leaderboard since its appearance. It would provide the power of providence to the monstrous geniuses who were able to be ranked on the Heaven Azure leaderboard. Although obtaining the power of providence wasn't truly obtaining providence, and wasn't completely turning the providence into one's own, it would still strengthen one's own providence and make everything go smoothly. It was obviously helpful for cultivation and could even turn something rotten into something magical. In short, having a strong providence was an extremely good thing. Everyone wanted it. The Heaven Azure leaderboard in the air made a rustling sound, as if it was being blown by a strong wind. The last name, which was the 100th name, lit up with a faint green glow. Immediately after, the 100th seat of honor automatically flew up and slowly rose to a height of 100 meters, floating right below the Heaven Azure leaderboard. On the Heaven Azure leaderboard, the name that was emitting a faint green glow suddenly shone brightly, covering the glow of the other names. It was as if a dragon was roaring and the faint green glow on the name rushed out of the Heaven Azure leaderboard and turned into a small snake. After circling a few times in the air, it dived down. After the providence entered his body, the genius's body trembled and revealed a comfortable expression. The seat of honor slowly descended and a faint red glow could be seen flickering on his body. It took a while for it to fade away. Immediately after, the name of the 99th genius on the Heaven Azure leaderboard also emitted a faint green glow. The 99th genius on the seat of honor flew into the air and floated right below the Heaven Azure leaderboard. His name shone brightly and turned into a small snake. After circling a few times in the air, it returned to his body. This was the process of obtaining the blessing. If one looked closely, they would notice that the faint green glow on the 100th seat of honor and the 99th seat of honor had a slight difference. However, it wasn't very obvious. A slight difference was still a difference. One by one, the geniuses rose into the sky. Their karmic luck appeared on the Tianqing ranking again and again, turning into small snakes. Each snake was larger than the last, and its color continued to darken. It went from light green to light green, then to dark green, and finally to light blue. The color of the blessing could be divided into green, blue, red, and purple. Among them, purple was the most important. Purple blessing meant that the blessing was extremely powerful and shocking. The geniuses in the 100th to 60th High Nobles Providence belonged to the green category. The geniuses in the 61st to 31st High Nobles Providence belonged to the blue category. Starting from the 30th High Nobles Providence belonged to the red category. However, the blessing received by the 30th seat of honor was a faint red color. It turned into a meter-long snake dragon that let out a roar and spread out. From the 30th seat to the 11th seat of honor, the blessing's color deepened from faint red to dark red. The blessing flood dragon also increased from 1 meter to 3 meters in length. However, it still hadn't reached 3 meters in length. From the 10th seat of honor onwards, the blessing's color changed once again. The blessing's light changed from dark red to faint purple. It also changed from a 3-meter-long snake dragon to a 3-meter-long flood dragon. The difference between a flood dragon and a snake dragon was that a snake dragon didn't have claws, but a flood dragon did. It was of a higher level than a snake dragon. From the Heaven Azure leaderboard, a faint purple light flew out and turned into a 3-meter-long flood dragon. It let out a loud roar and circled a few times before swooping down, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. After the flood dragon entered his body, the 10th seat of honor trembled. His face was filled with comfort, as if he was enjoying himself. As the seat of honor landed, a faint purple blessing flickered on his body. Everyone was envious of him. Although it was only a faint purple, it was still a purple blessing. It was an extremely noble blessing. Soon, it was the 9th seat of honor's turn. The 9th seat's blessing flood dragon's color deepened and its length increased to 2 meters. The 2-meter-long flood dragon roared and swooped down. After receiving the blessing of luck, the spirit of these monstrous geniuses immediately changed. They seemed to be in high spirits and were brimming with energy. One after another, the geniuses received the blessing. When it was Suyueshi's turn, the length of the Jiao dragon had reached 60 feet, and its color had turned purple. Purple light flickered on her body, adding a sense of nobility to the demoness, making her even more charming. The 4th seat of honor was taken by Qin Aoxian. Her blessing flood dragon was 7 meters long and its color was deeper than Suyueshi's. The 3rd seat of honor, Yang Zhantian, flew up and accepted the blessing. Yang Zhantian's blessing flood dragon was 8 meters long and its color was closer to purple. It also contained traces of treasure light, making it look even more noble and extraordinary. It made Yang Zhantian's figure seem infinitely tall. Together with the seat of honor behind him, he looked like a flood dragon coming out of the sea. The 2nd seat of honor, Gulwankong, had a blessing flood dragon that was 9 meters long and its color was deep purple. It shone with treasure light and looked very noble. It was much more noble than Yang Zhantian's. Moreover, the crowd noticed that Gulwankong's blessing flood dragon was starting to shed its original form and transform into a real dragon. Gulwankong's seat of honor was called the Sky Seat. Therefore, after the blessing flood dragon entered his body, there was a flood dragon soaring in the vast sky behind the Sky Seat of honor. It shuttled through the clouds and controlled the seas and the mountains. Finally, it was Chu Mu's turn. He was the first seat of honor, the Starry Sky Seat of honor. The Starry Sky Seat of honor carried Chu Mu and slowly rose into the sky. It floated below the Tianqing ranking. On the Tianqing ranking, Chu Mu's name shone brightly. The color of the light wasn't deep purple but purple gold. It was a unique color that attracted the attention of the crowd. The purple gold light was pure and flawless. It could be said to be perfect. It made the crowd gasp. It's so beautiful. This color. The one and only purple gold color. I wonder how strong the purple gold blessing flood dragon is. Amidst the discussions of the crowd, the light on the name shone brightly. It was like the sun hanging in the sky, causing the crowd to cover their eyes. It was too bright and dazzling. Next, an earth-shattering dragon roar resounded in the crowd's ears. It reverberated through the heavens and the earth, piercing through time and space. A dragon that was 10 feet long appeared in the sky. It was lifelike. It had already surpassed the category of a flood dragon. It was a real dragon. The blessing flood dragon soared in the sky above the 100 godly mountains. It controlled the heavens and the earth, as if it was going to enter the starry sky. What a strong blessing flood dragon! It's actually the blessing flood dragon. With the help of the blessing flood dragon, Chu Mu will soar into the sky. No one can be compared to him. Emperor Su sighed in envy. After the blessing flood dragon circled in the sky 9 times, its eyes shone brightly. It dove down and entered Chu Mu's body. Chu Mu's body trembled. It was as if he was soaking in a hot spring. It was extremely comfortable. It was indescribable. It was even more comfortable than when he broke through. After the blessing flood dragon entered his body, a true dragon appeared in the starry sky behind the first seat. It soared in the boundless starry sky, controlling the Milky Way and the Sea of Stars. Chapter 1298. The vigorous Heaven Azure List battle, from the beginning to the end of the 4 stages, took a total of close to half a year and finally ended. However, the end wasn't really the end. It was a brand new beginning. After half a year, the construction of the Heaven Azure Palace was completed. The Heaven Azure Palace was built by the Heavenly Sword Hall with the help of various great emperors. It floated in the starry sky and existed independently. Although it belonged to the Heavenly Sword Hall in name, it existed independently. The Heaven Azure Palace existed in the starry sky and was considered a half-world. There was a strong spatial barrier and countless powerful seals that protected the Heaven Azure Palace. Even a great emperor wouldn't be able to break through it in a short period of time. The current Heaven Azure Palace master was the Evergreen Great Emperor. The Evergreen Great Emperor was the oldest among the human race great emperors. The Evergreen Great Emperor's strength was unfathomable. However, he had been in seclusion for many years and hadn't fought for tens of thousands of years. Hence, no one knew how strong he was. Even the chaotic Sky Great Emperor admitted that he wasn't as strong as the Evergreen Great Emperor. This time, the Evergreen Great Emperor was invited to be the Heaven Azure Palace master. With the Evergreen Great Emperor overseeing the Heaven Azure Palace, they would be safe. After all, the Heaven Azure List battle was held in the Heaven Azure Palace. It was extremely important as it concerned the fate of the human race's monstrous geniuses. If the 100 monstrous geniuses on the Heaven Azure List could grow up and become great emperors, the human race's strength would increase tremendously. Their ranking among the 100 races would skyrocket, especially the top 10 monstrous geniuses. Once they became great emperors, they would be the strongest among the great emperors. They would be the mainstay of the human race and would be feared by the foreign races. Hence, the existence of the Heaven Azure Palace was extremely important. Otherwise, if the Heaven Azure List was taken away or lost by the foreign races, it would be a great loss to the human race. Other than the evergreen Great Emperor overseeing the Heaven Azure Palace, there were two other great emperors who took turns to oversee the matters of the Heaven Azure Palace. They also started to form the Heaven Azure Sword Guard. According to the high standards, every Heaven Azure Sword Guard was at the immemorial realm. The commander of the Heaven Azure Sword Guards was an expert at the High Sword Saint level. After the Heaven Youth List contest ended, all the demon-like geniuses left the Holy Sword Star and returned to their respective places. When I go back this time, I will go into seclusion for a period of time. After I come out of seclusion, my strength will definitely increase significantly. At that time, I will look for you to fight again. Before leaving, Lien Hongyan said to Chu Mu, I will also look for you to fight again. Yang Zhantian's battle intent was still strong, and it did not diminish in the slightest. Just you wait, Su Yueshi said coldly. Qin Aoxian took a deep look at Chu Mu and said nothing. See you in the future. Gu Luankong smiled lazily. Chu Mu nodded. These were all strong opponents with outstanding talent. After the Heaven Azure List competition, they had all obtained Purple Fate. After going into seclusion to cultivate, their strength would increase by leaps and bounds. It was even possible for them to soar into the sky. The next time they met, their cultivations would definitely be much stronger than they were now. Chu Mu was also looking forward to it. He was confident that his strength would increase significantly in a short period of time. After that, he would be able to fight with strong opponents again. Just thinking about it made him excited. Starships flew out of the Holy Sword Star one after another. They flew at their maximum speed in the vast starry sky. Suddenly, the sky was filled with flowing light. As for Chu Mu and the rest, they went through the Gate of Starry and went through the teleportation portal directly to the Heavenly Sword Hall's side hall. After that, they used the Gate of Starry of the Heavenly Sword Hall's side hall to teleport across galaxies to the main hall of Heavenly Sword Hall. This was the intention of the main hall master of Heavenly Sword Hall. After all, Chu Mu had obtained the first place on the Heaven Azure list. That was a big deal. The Five Elements Sword Sect had originally wanted to welcome Chu Mu back. Unfortunately, besides being a disciple of the Five Elements Sword Sect, Chu Mu was also the son of God of Heavenly Sword Hall. His status was much higher than that of a disciple of the Five Elements Sword Sect. However, Chu Mu did not return to the Five Elements Sword Sect. The Five Elements Sword Sect's reputation was still great. Once again, it was known throughout the Night Darkness Galaxy and the Demon Sword Star Zone. The four major star zones also knew about the existence of such an overlord sect. Moreover, there were many geniuses from other star zones who specially rushed to the Night Darkness Galaxy of the Demon Sword Star Zone. Their purpose was to join the Five Elements Sword Sect and become a disciple of the Five Elements Sword Sect. This was the effect of Chu Mu's reputation. In the main hall of Heavenly Sword Hall, the main hall master, deputy main hall master and various elders were all present. The 10 sons of God had also arrived in the main hall. All of them had a cheerful look on their faces. They looked very happy. First place on the Heaven Youth list. Although they had imagined it before, they actually did not dare to be sure. This was because they knew about people like Yang Zhantian, Qin Aoxian, Gu Luankong and the others. They were super monstrous geniuses with powerful inheritances, profound cultivation, and tyrannical strength. They only thought that it would be good if Chu Mu could make it into the top 10. It would be best if he could make it into the top 3. However, that was just wishful thinking. It was a kind of extravagant hope. Unexpectedly, Chu Mu made it to the 4th place. To them, this was already the best result. This meant that a monstrous genius had finally appeared in the Heavenly Sword Hall who could contend with those tyrannical great emperor's descendants. In the end, Chu Mu's ranking directly rose to the 1st place. He was at the top of the list. All of a sudden, the people of the Heavenly Sword Hall were stunned. They could not believe it. In the end, Chu Mu was ranked first. Such a result made the people of the Heavenly Sword Hall jump and laugh. All of them were old monsters who had cultivated for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. They were so excited that they were like young people. In the Heaven Youth virtual world, Chumu had obtained the first place on the Heaven Ascension list. However, that was a competition of potential. The last battle of the Heaven Youth list was a competition of strength. Chumu's talent was very strong and his strength was not weak. However, his cultivation was too low. It was his weakness and his shortcoming. Moreover, the techniques that he had mastered were also limited. In comparison, Chumu came from the outside world. He was not a genius born and bred in the ancient god world. He first became a disciple of the Five Elements sword sect. After that, he experienced some things and became the Shensi of the Heavenly Sword Hall. Although the Heavenly Sword Hall was not as good as before, it still had a profound foundation. It was not inferior to those top great emperors. However, Chumu had only been a Shensi for a short period of time. There were many resources that he had not used yet. Unknowingly, his foundation and accumulation could not be compared to the top great emperor's descendants. His background, foundation, and cultivation could not be compared to the top great emperor's descendant. However, in the end, he took the first place. Who wouldn't be shocked? For a period of time, discussions about Chumu could be heard wherever one went. His background was also gradually uncovered. When people found out that Chumu had come from the outside world, they were even more shocked. Most people had not experienced the cultivation environment of the outside world personally. However, they had heard that compared to the ancient god world, it was said that the cultivation environment was very poor. However, such a demonic genius had appeared in such a place. No one knew what to say. This time, other than Chumu, the first Shensi, Guanlin, the second Shensi, Murong Qingfeng, and the third Shensi, Tuobajan, were also on the Heaven Youth list. Chumu was first, Guanlin was 19th, Murong Qingfeng was 48th, and Tuobajan was 72nd. Other than Guanlin and Chumu, Murong Qingfeng and Tuobajan's rankings were only average. However, they were not bad. In the top 100, there were 4 Shensi from the Heavenly Sword Hall. The strongest one was Chumu, who was in first place. A round of praise was inevitable. However, it did not take up much time. The chief palace master and the rest understood that Chumu and the rest could take advantage of this opportunity to cultivate in seclusion. It would be extremely effective. After bidding farewell, Chumu also returned to Zhentian's floating island. Although 6 Shensi had been eliminated, it did not prevent them from cultivating in seclusion. However, their improvement was not as great as Chumu and the rest. After giving his instructions, Chumu directly entered the cultivation room and started cultivating in seclusion. After nearly half a year of the Heaven Youth List competition, Chumu's cultivation and strength were constantly improving. He had gained the most from the last battle. It's a pity. If I could comprehend and cultivate in the Starry Sky Supreme Seat, the effect would definitely be 100 times better than the outside world, Chumu secretly sighed. The Starry Sky Supreme Seat had a magical power. It was extremely helpful for comprehension and cultivation. However, the use of the Starry Sky Supreme Seat was not without a price. Every time it was activated, it would consume a large amount of energy. It had only been activated for a short period of time, but the energy consumed was extremely shocking. It caused the spiritual chi of the universe in the celestial sword star to become more than 30% thinner. This was something that would take hundreds of years or even longer in the future to recover. Otherwise, if they could use the Starry Sky Supreme Seat with a small price, the human tribe could definitely use the Starry Sky Supreme Seat to cultivate more geniuses and make the human tribe stronger. Since the human tribe had the Starry Sky Supreme Seat, the strange tribe naturally had other treasures as well. However, they would have to pay a hefty price to use them. Chumu and the rest went into seclusion. After Gu Luankong, Qin Aoxian, Yang Zhantian and the rest of the geniuses on the Heaven Youth list left the celestial sword star and returned to their respective sects. They immediately went into seclusion in their cultivation rooms. This time, they would not be in seclusion for 1 or 2 months. It might not even be half a year or a year. It might be 2 or 3 years or even longer. After they came out of seclusion, the strength of each of the geniuses would increase by leaps and bounds. After the storm, there was silence. However, everyone was looking forward to seeing what kind of storm these geniuses would stir up after the silence. The Heaven Youth List competition lasted for less than half a year. In terms of the development of the tribes, it was insignificant. It was like a drop in the ocean. Even though the human tribe had sealed the 4 major star regions, when the strange tribes discovered and wanted to investigate, the seal would slowly be lifted. Everything was set in stone. Unless the strange tribes wanted to start a race war, they could only accept it. It was impossible to start a race war in a short period of time. Once it started, it would definitely affect the 100 tribes and cause great suffering. Even though the human tribe was declining, they still had a strong foundation and were not easy to deal with. Time passed slowly. In the vast starry sky there seemed to be no end. There were various starships flying at high speed towards the depths of the ancient god world, as if they were exploring the mysteries of the ancient god world. Chapter 1299. A long, long time ago, the Archean world was a huge and complete world. After the war of the gods and the slaughter of the 100 races, the center of the Archean world was shattered. Some of the continents were shattered and separated from the Archean world, forming living continents such as the ancient Sword continent. After some time, these living continents were found one after another and the connection between them and the Archean world was re-established. As for the ancient god world, it was located at the center of the Archean world. After the Archean world was shattered, the rules and laws changed and it was separated from the Archean world, forming 2 independent worlds that complemented each other. Time and space were undoubtedly very mysterious. The center of the Archean world was not very big. However, the ancient god world that was formed after the Archean world was like a universe. It was many times bigger than the current Archean world. There was no comparison. In the ancient god world, there were many star areas. Some of these star areas were inhabited by living beings, while others were abandoned star areas. The so-called abandoned star areas referred to galaxies formed by planets without any signs of life. They were not suitable for cultivation, nor were they suitable for living, because the environment was extremely harsh. The human clan occupied 4 star areas. The other races also occupied some star areas. However, no matter what race they were, most of them would send some people to the ancient god sector on their starships to explore and search for other life star areas and other life star areas. Every star region with life contained a lot of resources. These resources were helpful for the reproduction of the race, and it was a place that the 100 races would fight for. Starships sailed in groups of 3 to 5 in the vast starry sky. They left the human race's territory and the other races' territories and went deeper into the ancient god world. These starships had different shapes. Some were sword-shaped starships, some were pitch-black starships that looked like ferocious beasts, some were like flying eagles, some were like giant pythons, and some were like round plates. These starships were the starships of the 100 clans. They were the vanguard starships of the 100 clans. They were starships that explored other life forms in the ancient god world. These starships also discovered their own existence, but they did not attack each other. Their mission was not to destroy each other, but to explore the depths of the starry sky. As they flew, they saw a ball of blue light at the front of the starship. The light was very deep, as if it contained countless mysteries. It attracted the people on the starship to explore it. No matter what race they were, when they saw the deep blue ball of light, they were attracted and flew in from all directions. Full speed ahead. The captains of every starship gave similar orders. There was a saying that went, Looking at a mountain seems to be running a horse to death. It seemed very close, as if it was right in front of you, but it was actually very far away. The deep blue cluster of light seemed to be within reach. However, every starship flew at full speed for several months before they finally approached it. The deep blue was not a cluster of light but a huge oval. It was like a huge egg that was giving out deep blue light. The 10,000 m long starship was as tiny as an ant in front of the huge deep blue egg. It was like a grain of sand compared to a vast ocean. There was no comparison between the two at all. The deep blue light was emitted, and it was full of powerful energy fluctuations. There was a trace of attraction in it which made people want to go in and explore it. However, no one did so directly. The vast starry sky was full of unknown dangers. Sometimes a meteorite could be some kind of giant beast of the starry sky. Once it was awakened, it could erupt with terrible destructive power. They had been in the vast starry sky for many years and had seen too much. They were more cautious and would not be easily fooled. Many starships stopped in front of the deep blue light, activated their functions, and analyzed it. The results of the analysis showed that the deep blue light was just a kind of gas, a kind of energy gas, and was harmless. Then, the doors of the starships opened, and the saints of the eternal realm flew out of the starships. They approached the deep blue light and wanted to enter, but they were blocked by a soft and indestructible force. No matter how hard they tried, they could not enter. Helpless, the experts of the various races could only study and explore the periphery. In the end, they confirmed that there was a world inside the deep blue light, a world with life. As the research and exploration progressed, more and more secrets were unearthed. Finally, when they felt that it was about time, the various races started the starships to return at full speed. They did not care about the loss of their starships at all, because they knew that the sooner they returned to their respective starfields and reported this matter, the more likely they would have an advantage. If there was a world with life inside the deep blue light, it would be a great opportunity for every race. They could not miss it. Time passed slowly. In the Zhentian floating island, Chu-Mu was alone in the cultivation room of the Zhentian palace. The bright light bead released light, making the cultivation room as bright as day. Chu-Mu sat in the middle of the cultivation room, and his body seemed to be flickering with light. Wisps of yuan qi of heaven and earth seeped out from the four walls of the cultivation room, from the ceiling above, and from the floor below. They turned into wisps of meandering energy that swam toward Chu-Mu and entered Chu-Mu's body to be absorbed and refined by him. Closed-door cultivation was comprehensive, but there were also important points, because if one pursued comprehensive improvement, it would undoubtedly take more time. It was not easy to improve one's cultivation. Under normal circumstances, it would often take time to accumulate. After cultivating to the nirvana realm, even if one was a genius, it would often take a lot of time to increase one's cultivation by one heavenly layer. Sometimes a few years would not be enough. But it was necessary to cultivate a cultivation technique. As long as one had time, they would cultivate. No matter how long it was also a kind of accumulation. Good accumulation would lead to success. Cultivating the divine wilderness sword art and the astral calamity cultivation technique was supplementary. The main point of Chu-Mu's closed-door cultivation was to comprehend. Comprehending sword arts, sword domain, void-breaking force field, and the other inheritance of the void-breaking secret manual. He did not neglect the cultivation of the various laws of heaven and earth. This made Chu-Mu's schedule very tight. He wished that he could use one day as 10 days, and also wished that he could divide himself into 10, one to comprehend this and one to cultivate that. They would each divide their work and advance together. Unfortunately, that was impossible. After cultivating, Chu-Mu stood up and left the cultivation room, heading for the sword training room. The sword training room was right next to the cultivation room. With the heaven-beheading sword in hand, Chu-Mu first cultivated his sword art. The final challenge of the Heavenly Youth list had caused Chu Mu's sword arts attainments to increase significantly. Then, he comprehended the sword domain, causing Chu Mu's sword arts to reach a new height. This affected his sword arts, causing his sword arts attainments to increase even more. At this point, Chu Mu had already been in closed-door cultivation for close to a year. In the sword training room, he displayed his sword art. It was just a basic sword art, but it was as if he had the help of the god. Every stroke was exquisite and unparalleled. As he practiced, there was a silver luster on the sword, like flowing water. Although it looked like water, it had a shocking sharpness, as if it could cut open the void. That was sword energy, and it was an extremely powerful sword energy. It surpassed the 5th level of sword energy. This sword energy had reached the 6th level. The 6th level of sword energy could increase the power of sword arts by 7 times. Sword energy was like cultivation. The higher the level, the harder it was to cultivate. In the Nirvana realm, there were very few swordsmen who could cultivate sword energy to the 6th level. And to be able to grasp the 6th level of sword energy in the initial stage of the Nirvana realm was even rarer. The reason why Chu Mu was able to grasp the 6th level of sword energy so quickly was directly related to the Heavenly Youth list. After practicing the sword art a few times, Chu Mu put away his sword and stood still. He held his breath and concentrated. Immediately after, a mysterious power spread out from his body. It was the sword realm. The sword realm was divided into entry, initial, deshang, and complete. The difference between each level was huge and unimaginable. Chu Mu had only grasped the entry sword realm. Although he had cultivated for close to a year, the progress of the sword realm was not obvious. He had only become more familiar with its application. Within the range of the sword realm, everything was clearly sensed by Chu Mu. He saw through every detail and nothing could escape him. However, although the power of the sword realm was powerful, it was limited. If one's strength surpassed Chu Mu by too much, the sword realm would not be able to suppress the opponent. Chu Mu would also not be able to see through the opponent's attack. At the end of the day, whether it was sword art, sword realm, or force field, cultivation was the foundation and the most important thing. Without sufficient cultivation, all powerful techniques would not be able to unleash their true power. After cultivating the sword realm, Chu Mu rested for a while. After recovering his strength, he began cultivating the void-shattering force field. The force field and the sword realm were similar, but there were also differences. When comparing the two, the sword realm was superior. However, the force field also had its own ingenuity. Although he had grasped the sword realm, Chu Mu would not give up on cultivating the force field. He still wanted to grasp more force field. He even had an idea, which was to fuse the force field and the sword realm. However, it was very difficult. After trying a few times, he had always failed. However, this did not stop Chu Mu from working hard. If he continued to try, there would definitely be a day when he would succeed. Just the thought of combining the force field and the sword realm made Chu Mu somewhat excited. The power would definitely be very powerful. After cultivating the void-shattering force field for a while, Chu Mu recovered his strength and began cultivating the other inheritance of the void-shattering secret manual. It was an absolute art that was of a higher grade and more powerful than the void-piercing sword chi. Its grade had reached the level of a high-grade absolute art. This high-grade absolute art was called the Void Nirvana Sword. As a high-grade absolute art, its power was more than 10 times stronger than the void-piercing sword chi. Naturally, the difficulty of cultivating it was also many times higher than the void-piercing sword chi. Even after almost a year of cultivation, Chu Mu had only grasped the basics of it. He was still not proficient enough. Cultivating. Time flew by. In a flash, 5 years had passed. Chapter 1300. Each seclusion lasted for 5 years. He had also completely absorbed and mastered the various comprehensions he had gained from the Heaven Youth List battle and turned them into his own strength. After 5 years of seclusion, the geniuses came out one after another. At this time, many of them were over 100 years old. However, they were still listed on the Heaven Youth List and were blessed by the Providence. Unless someone challenged them and defeated them, they would not be able to obtain the providence of the other party. However, it was not that easy to issue a challenge. The Heaven Youth Palace had rules. Firstly, the age of the challenger could not be over 100 years old. Secondly, the Heaven Youth Palace would make arrangements as soon as possible. Then, there would be a battle to determine the winner. Thirdly, each challenger only had one chance to issue a challenge. The geniuses who could be listed on the Heaven Youth List were not to be underestimated. After a few years of seclusion, they would absorb various comprehensions and settle down. Their cultivation would increase, and they would become stronger in all aspects. They would become more powerful and difficult to shake. Usually, if others wanted to be listed on the Heaven Youth List, they would have to wait for the next Heaven Youth List battle. However, by then, it would be a different batch of people after 100 years. Unexpectedly, someone came to visit Chu Mu as soon as he came out of seclusion. God's son of God Chu, I am Chen Yi, the messenger of the Heaven Youth Palace. I am here because someone has nominated a challenge and I am here to invite you, Chen Yi said directly after cupping his hands in front of his chest to Chu Mu. Challenge me? Chu Mu was stunned. He had imagined what would happen after he came out of seclusion, but he did not expect that the first thing he would do after coming out of seclusion would be to receive a challenge. Is it Lian Hongyun or Yang Zhantian? Chu Mu asked. Neither. It's a newcomer, Chen Yi said. Chu Mu was curious. He thought for a while. He had just come out of seclusion, and there was nothing important at the moment. After informing Chen Yi, he left with Chen Yi and headed to the Heaven Youth Palace. Chu Mu had not been to the Heaven Youth Palace since it was built. He wanted to take the opportunity to take a look and see for himself. Along the way, Chen Yi introduced the challenger to Chu Mu. The challenger's name was Fang Guxie. He came from a small family and was a monstrous genius himself. He was 98 years old this year. 5 years ago, during the Heaven Youth List battle, he did not appear because he had some fortuitous encounters and was receiving his inheritance. Fang Guxie had appeared 2 years ago. As soon as he appeared, he went around challenging the monstrous geniuses. He defeated them one by one with the sword in his hand. Even some of the monstrous geniuses on the Tianqing list were defeated by his sword. Among them, the one with the highest ranking was the genius ranked 21st, who was also defeated by Fang Guxie's sword. Because of this, Fang Guxie received the title of Evil Sword. Evil Sword. This meant that Fang Guxie's swordsmanship was very evil. Otherwise, he wouldn't have received such a title. Fang Guxie and Evil Sword's names were getting more and more famous. Coincidentally, most of the geniuses on the Tianqing list were in seclusion and their reputations were not as great as before. Evil Sword's name, Fang Guxie, seemed to be catching up. However, it was unknown whether it was due to absolute confidence in his own strength or arrogance. Not long ago, Evil Sword Fang Guxie had made an application to the Heaven Youth Palace, stating that he wanted to challenge Star Sky Sovereign Chu Mu, who was on the Tianqing list. Fang Guxie's age and other aspects met the challenge criteria. He was also strong enough. Therefore, the Heaven Youth Palace did not reject him. Instead, they sent envoy Chen Yi to look for Chu Mu. After hearing Chen Yi's introduction, Chu Mu's interest in Fang Guxie, who was known as Evil Sword, increased. Many years ago, he had a fortuitous encounter and had been receiving his inheritance. After coming out, his strength had increased by leaps and bounds. Many of the geniuses on the Tianqing list had been defeated by his sword. This showed that he was extremely strong. Chu Mu also knew that there were still some geniuses like Fang Guxie. After all, the 4 major galaxies were not small. There were countless planets with life and various half-worlds and secret realms. Since ancient times there were countless geniuses. Some of them had fallen, but left behind their corresponding inheritances. The younger generation would always have the opportunity to obtain their inheritances. Fang Guxia's inheritance should be pretty good. Under Chen Yi's lead, Chu Mu arrived at the Heaven Youth Palace. The Heaven Youth Palace was located within the half-world. The so-called half-world could be understood as a unique world where half of it was attached to the starry sky and the other half extended into the depths of space. It had a powerful spatial barrier that was difficult to break through. Chu Mu carefully sensed it. He found that with his current attainments in the laws of space, he was unable to pass through this spatial barrier. The expert who had created this half-world had attainments in the laws of space that surpassed Chu Mu's by who knew how many times. Indeed, the expert who had created this half-world was the Chaotic Sky Emperor. The Chaotic Sky Emperor's attainments in the laws of space were countless times higher than Chu Mu's. There was simply no comparison between the two. Chen Yi was the Heaven Youth Palace's envoy, so he naturally had a way to bring Chu Mu in. The Heaven Youth Palace's main hall was like a towering tree that grew between heaven and earth. A dense aura of life filled the entire half-world. It was said that the evergreen immortal emperor was in seclusion at the peak of the Heaven Youth Palace. He wouldn't appear normally and would only appear when there was a major event. Chen Yi brought Chu Mu directly into a side hall. It was an extension of the huge tree. There was a person sitting in the side hall with his eyes closed as if he was cultivating. When Chu Mu saw this person, his first impression was that his appearance was ordinary. If he was placed in a crowd, it would be difficult to distinguish him. He was very ordinary and his aura was also very ordinary. There was nothing special about him. As if sensing Chu Mu and Chen Yi's arrival, this person opened his eyes. In an instant, Chu Mu felt that this person's aura had changed greatly. Everything was because of his eyes. He didn't know how to describe it, but there was a feeling of evil. An evil aura was emitted from his body. There was no need for an introduction. Chu Mu knew that this person was the person who had challenged him, Evil Sword Fang Guxia. "You are Chu Mu?" Fang Guxia asked with a smile on his face. It made him look even more evil. In an instant, his ordinary face became very unique. Even if there were millions of people, he would be recognized quickly. Chu Mu nodded. "Since you want to challenge me, let's start." "Very well." The evil aura on Fang Guxia's face became even more obvious. Chu Mu could feel that Fang Guxia's cultivation was at the peak of the third sky of Nirvana realm. Although it was related to luck, it also meant that Fang Guxia's talent was very strong. He could be considered a monstrous genius. Unfortunately, time didn't wait for him. Otherwise, if he participated in the Heaven Youth ranking 5 years ago, he might have been able to get into the top 10. It was also because he had absolute confidence in his own strength that Fang Guxia challenged all the monstrous geniuses. He didn't even let some of the people on the Heaven Youth ranking go. After confirming his own strength, he applied to the Heaven Youth Palace to challenge Chu Mu. According to him, since he wanted to challenge, he should do his best. Otherwise, he might as well not do it. It was very extreme. Of course, Fang Guxia was confident in his own inheritance and strength. He was confident that he could defeat Chu Mu and replace him, because his inheritance was a powerful inheritance that belonged to the era of God. It was the inheritance of a peak great emperor. Chu Mu wasn't sure about Fang Guxia's confidence and thoughts, nor would he probe. He only knew that if he challenged him, he would defeat the other party. That was all. This could be considered a big deal, but it wasn't a big deal either. It was just a challenge. Therefore, it didn't cause much of a commotion. Only the inner members of the Heaven Youth Palace knew about it. One of the 2 vice palace masters, the 100 Flowers Emperor, appeared in the side palace to host this challenge. The 100 Flowers Emperor had a flowery fragrance on her body. She looked like a mature and charming beauty. Her close-fitting flower robe made her even more charming. The 100 Flowers Emperor's beautiful eyes landed on Chu Mu's face, filled with admiration. She admired such a monstrous junior. Next, the 100 Flowers Emperor looked at Feng Guxia. Feng Guxia was younger than Chu Mu, but his cultivation base was higher than Chu Mu's. Furthermore, he was extremely strong. The 100 Flowers Emperor hoped that there would be more juniors like him. Only then would the human race be stronger. Regardless of whether Chu Mu or Feng Guxia won this battle, the 100 Flowers Emperor would be happy to see it. You guys can start now. The 100 Flowers Emperor's voice was as melodious as spring water. I heard that you've mastered the sword domain. Since that's the case, why don't you show it to me? Feng Guxia said evilly. As the sound of his voice faded, waves of energy spread out from his body. These waves of energy were somewhat sinister. Heavenly Evil Force Field. Feng Guxia was from the lineage of the Heavenly Evil Emperor. Naturally, his unique force field was the Heavenly Evil Force Field. The Heavenly Evil Force Field spread out with traces of evil energy, instantly wrapping around Chu Mu. Chu Mu instantly felt all sorts of heaven and earth law powers being suppressed. Moreover, on the mental level, his divine remembrance power was also suppressed by a lot, and even received some sort of interference. Chu Mu didn't release his sword domain. Instead, he released his void-breaking force field. Feng Guxia might be a good opponent. He could use this opportunity to test out his gains from his 5 years of seclusion. The moment the void-breaking force field appeared, traces of silver light extended outwards. Each of them was incomparably sharp, slicing apart the void and enveloping Feng Guxia. Feng Guxia was stunned at first, but soon after, he was infuriated. This wasn't a sword domain, but a force field. He was very confident, but Chu Mu didn't release his sword domain. This made him a little annoyed, as he felt that he was being looked down upon. For someone like him who had challenged and defeated many monstrous geniuses, this was a kind of humiliation. He secretly made up his mind. Since this person was looking down on him, he would use his own strength and the sword in his hand to teach this person a lesson and defeat him ruthlessly. With a thought, Feng Guxia slashed out with his sword. It seemed like a simple slash, but it carried a sinister feeling. It was as if this sword was everywhere and there was no way to dodge it. The Heavenly Evil lineage had their own unique attainments in sword skills. Their style leaned towards the sinister, and didn't stick to one pattern. It was very exquisite. Chu Mu's eyes lit up. Chapter 1301. Feng Guxia's attainments in swordsmanship were profound. What he displayed was the style of swordsmanship inherited from the heavenly diabolism. Once he displayed it, there seemed to be rolling sword light, endless and intermittent, flickering intermittently. In short, this was an extremely evil sword technique. It was neither strange nor evil. It was somewhere between the two, and it was difficult to describe it clearly. It was Chu Mu's first time seeing such a style of swordsmanship. Therefore, he countered every move as he fought with Feng Guxia, constantly learning the characteristics of Feng Guxia's swordsmanship. For a moment, in the eyes of the bystanders, both sides were evenly matched. The void-shattering force field wasn't inferior to the heavenly evil force field. They both countered each other, each having their own buffs and weaknesses. They both had their own strength. Chu Mu didn't intentionally attack, only constantly dodging Feng Guxia's sword technique. Occasionally, a sword would be like a stroke of genius, forcing Feng Guxia to change moves and unleash even more strength. Feng Guxia himself was in the middle of it and did not know what was going on. He just felt that Chu Mu did not seem to be as powerful as the rumors made him out to be. He thought that it was because he was strong enough. Only Chu Mu and the spectating 100 Flowers Empress saw everything clearly. Chu Mu was leading Feng Guxia by the nose. This kid's sword skills are even more refined than 5 years ago. The 100 Flowers Emperor sighed. Even though the Hundred Blossoms Emperor hadn't appeared in the Seat of Honor Challenge 5 years ago, she had paid close attention to every single battle. She had witnessed Chu Mu's swordsmanship many times, and she could tell that Chu Mu's swordsmanship was much more refined than before. If that's all you have, you can admit defeat, Chu Mu said mercilessly. When Fang Guxia heard this, the evil look on his face became even more obvious. He was angry, really angry. He was underestimated again. Then have a taste of my heavenly evil swordsmanship, Fang Guxia shouted. The heavenly evil sword art was a heaven-class upper-grade sword art. Its power was not inferior to the flying fairy sword art or the chaotic space sword art. However, its style was completely different. Once the heavenly evil sword technique was unleashed, an astonishing heavenly evil sword chi pierced through the sky and shot towards Chu Mu, locking onto him, making him unable to dodge. This was the specialty of the heavenly evil sword technique. Chu Mu brandished his sword and displayed the ancient sword art. In the past 5 years, he had not cultivated any other heaven-level sword technique. Of course, as long as he mentioned it, the Heavenly Sword Hall would definitely give him a higher-level sword technique. However, Chu Mu knew that although the ancient archaic sword technique was only a heaven-level mid-level sword technique, he had not completely mastered it. His idea was to completely master and understand the ancient archaic sword technique. After that, he would consider cultivating a higher-level sword technique. This way, it would be faster and better. Moreover, it was also a matter of time. In addition to the sword technique, he still had to cultivate various other powers. If he wanted to cultivate a new heaven-level upper-grade sword technique, it would undoubtedly take more time and energy. Chu Mu's choice was not wrong. In the past 5 years, he had completely mastered the ancient archaic sword technique and grasped its essence. Once he displayed it, its power could actually compete with the heavenly evil sword technique. Of course, this was also because Fang Guxia had not yet mastered the essence of the heavenly evil sword technique. It was also because Chu Mu's swordsmanship was better than Fang Guxia's. Evil chi billowed and sword light wreaked havoc. Under the amplification of the heavenly evil force field, the heavenly evil sword technique's power was very strong. However, it still could not defeat Chu Mu. Fang Guxia activated his sword energy, which had reached the 5th level. The 5th level sword energy increased the power of the heavenly evil sword technique by 6 times. Even the heavenly evil sword chi was strengthened by the sword energy. The sword light was incomparably terrifying. Chu Mu also activated his 5th level sword energy, once again suppressing Fang Guxia's heavenly evil sword technique. A heaven-level middle-grade sword technique suppressing a heaven-level upper-grade sword technique. This seemed impossible, but Chu Mu did it. They are not on the same level. The Hundred Blossom Emperor concluded after watching. Fang Guxia might be talented and monstrous, but compared to Chu Mu, there was still a gap. However, Chu Mu seemed to be testing his own strength and did not directly defeat Fang Guxia. Fang Guxia gradually realized this. His sword technique paused, and he displayed his ultimate skill. The ultimate skill that he cultivated was called the Aocs 6 bodies. Fang Guxia stood with his sword in hand, pointing it upward and burning an incense stick towards the sky. He closed his eyes, then instantly opened them again. There seemed to be a grayish-black light flashing in his eyes, causing his eyes and temperament to become even more sinister. In an instant, Fang Guxia's body became illusory. In the sound of wind, Fang Guxia turned into 6 people and appeared around Chu Mu. Each of them held a sword and attacked with Chu Mu as the center. Man and sword unity turned into 6 sword light, shuttling back and forth towards Chu Mu. They were extremely fast, as if they could ignore time and space. This was an ultimate skill, a killer move. It was extremely powerful. Each sword light was extremely terrifying. The Aocs 6 bodies was different from Gulwankong's illusory Sky 9 paths. The illusory Sky 9 paths could split into a few people, and each of them could perform different sword techniques and footwork. It was very magical. On the other hand, the AOC's 6 bodies could only split into 6 figures to surround the target and attack with man and sword unity. Feeling the sharpness and terrifying power of the sword light, Chu Mu's face turned serious. Without hesitation, he activated his level 7 sword force. That's right. After a year of seclusion, Chu Mu's sword force broke through to level 6. After another 4 years, his sword force broke through again, reaching level 7. Level 7 sword force could increase the power of sword techniques by 8 times. It was an unimaginable increase. When Chu Mu activated his level 7 sword force, the 100 Flowers Empress' eyes widened in shock. She could imagine that Chu Mu would definitely improve in all aspects after 5 years of cultivation. For example, his cultivation would reach the early stage of the 3rd sky of Nirvana realm. His mastery of sword techniques would be more profound, and his attainments would increase. Previously, Chu Mu had already mastered level 5 sword force. It was normal for him to break through to level 6 sword force in 5 years. However, level 7 sword force was shocking. After activating his level 7 sword force, Chu Mu performed the first move of the ancient archaic sword art: wind rises, thunder falls. The wind howled and roared as if it was going to blow the heaven and earth apart. Lightning raged and disappeared in the sky, rumbling as it fell. This move was amplified by level 7 sword force by 8 times. It clashed with the AOC's 6 bodies and cancelled it out. Chu Mu immediately used Extreme Thunder Prison Break. The terrifying thunder was like an azure dragon that broke through the sky and fell straight down. The dragon's roar shook the heavens and the earth. The lightning radiance was clear, eliminating devils and evil. There was nothing it couldn't break. The power of Thunder Prison Break was increased by 8 times. Fang Guxia's expression changed drastically. He quickly performed the heavenly evil sword art to defend himself. However, the tyrannical sword light was shattered by the lightning dragon. The earth was scorched for thousands of miles. Fang Guxia's body trembled violently as purple electricity flowed through his body. When the lightning disappeared, Fang Guxia seemed to have used up all his energy. He half squatted down and gasped for breath. His face was pale. In order to resist the lightning, he had used up all his energy and could no longer maintain the heavenly evil force field. This move also made Fang Guxia realize that he was no match for Chu Mu, even though his cultivation was higher than Chu Mu's. "I will come for you again." Fang Guxia stood up and said in an unwilling tone. His evil qi didn't seem to work in front of Chu Mu. This was also because he hadn't grasped the essence of the heavenly evil force. Chu Mu only smiled and didn't say anything. Fang Guxia's strength was indeed not weak. He was comparable to Yang Zhantian 5 years ago. He was even slightly stronger than Yang Zhantian back then. He was close to Qin Aoxian. However, compared to Gu Luankong, there was still a gap. 5 years ago, Chu Mu was able to defeat Qin Aoxian and make Gu Luankong admit defeat. 5 years later, Chu Mu's strength had increased countless times. How could Fang Guxia be his opponent? It was natural that he would be defeated by Chu Mu. After the battle with Fang Guxia, Chu Mu had some confidence in his current strength. The 100 Flowers Empress encouraged Fang Guxia and praised Chu Mu before leaving. Chen Yi brought Chu Mu and introduced the Azure Sky Palace to him. He also brought Chu Mu for a tour. After that, Chen Yi sent Chu Mu off and returned to the Heavenly Sword Hall. When Chu Mu entered the Azure Sky Palace to fight with Fang Guxia, the exploration starships finally returned. These starships belonged to the Heavenly Sword Hall, so they returned directly to the Heavenly Sword Hall. The captain of the starships quickly went to the Heavenly Sword Hall to report an important matter. The Grand Hall Master, Deputy Grand Hall Master, and all the elders were present. They gathered in the Grand Hall for a discussion. "Are you sure it's an inhabited world?" the Grand Hall Master asked in a serious tone. "After our research, we can be sure that it's an inhabited world. However, we can't be sure about the resources and environment in this inhabited world." The captain of the starships, Xiaoze, answered seriously. They had indeed done some research, and came to some conclusions. Explain the situation in detail, the Grand Hall Master said. Xiaoze immediately explained the various situations that he had discovered. According to what you said, if we want to enter that inhabited world, we need experts to work together and open up a passage for those below the eternal realm to enter. The Grand Hall Master frowned. The original plan should have been to immediately send a group of saint-level experts, or even great emperor-level experts, into that inhabited world. However, that inhabited world was protected by a power that prevented saint-level experts from entering. It was as if their cultivation was restricted. This was the conclusion that Xiaoze and many other experts came to after their research. Only those below the eternal realm could enter without any danger to their lives. Otherwise, they would be crushed by the power. A new world with life meant a huge amount of cultivation resources. However, no one knew if there were experts in that new world. If one wanted to establish a foothold in the new world with life, or even occupy a huge amount of cultivation resources, there was no doubt that they would need to send out experts. The current situation was that martial saints couldn't enter. At most, only Nirvana Realm swordsmen could enter. It was a fact that Nirvana Realm swordsmen were inferior to Eternal Realm swordsmen. It was difficult to determine the outcome of sending out Nirvana Realm swordsmen. Chapter 1302. The main hall of the Heavenly Sword Hall released a message to the outside world, gathering the Nirvana Realm swordsmen from the 4 major galaxies to head to a new inhabited world. Because it was full of unknowns, the Nirvana Realm swordsmen could choose whether or not to participate. Have you heard? Our seniors from the human clan discovered a new inhabited world in the depths of the starry sky. You just found out? I found out the day before. A new inhabited world. That's a huge amount of cultivation resources. A new inhabited world means new cultivation resources, but it also means endless unknowns. It could be a crisis that could endanger one's life. I wonder if there are humans living in the new inhabited world called the Deep Blue World? Or are there other races? Brother Yin, we are all Nirvana Realm swordsmen. Why don't we go to the Heavenly Sword Hall to sign up and explore the new inhabited world? A Nirvana Realm swordsman said as his eyes lit up. The Deep Blue World is an unknown world after all. There are opportunities, but I'm afraid the danger will be even greater. I won't go. The invited Nirvana Realm swordsman shook his head and said slowly. Although a new inhabited world was a new opportunity for development for any race and was one of the guarantees for strengthening, developing a new inhabited world was bound to come with a huge price. Since ancient times, this kind of thing had happened before. Sometimes, after discovering a new inhabited world, they would discover that the inhabited world was extremely dangerous. They would suffer heavy losses and pay a great price to successfully occupy it. Although it did provide help for the reproduction and prosperity of the race, it was still a long time before they were able to do so. In short, to develop a new world, one had to pay a huge price. It was unknown whether they would succeed or not. Therefore, when the Heavenly Sword Hall's recruitment order was released, some Nirvana Realm swordsmen went to the Heavenly Sword Hall to sign up, while some gave up after thinking about it. The Deep Blue World. Chumu signed up without hesitation. The other 9 shensis of the Heavenly Sword Hall also signed up without hesitation. Therefore, only 10 shensis signed up to participate in the development of a new world. The monstrous geniuses on the Tianqing leaderboard also signed up after they came out of seclusion and received the news. Apart from the vanguard fleet of the human race, the fleets of the other races had also discovered the Deep Blue World. Therefore, time was of the essence. There was only half a month from the time the news was sent out to the time they departed. If they missed this time, they would have to move on their own if they wanted to go. However, the distance was far. Without a star map, one could only rely on luck to reach the Deep Blue World. In the vast starry sky, the deeper one went, the more dangerous it would be. It was very likely that one would encounter some kind of stardust storm or starry sky behemoth. If one moved alone, there was an 80 to 90% chance that one would die. Therefore, the Nirvana Realm swordsmen who wanted to participate in the development of a new world all rushed to the Heavenly Sword Hall to register after coming out of seclusion. Then, they gathered at the Heavenly Sword Hall's main hall. The main hall of the Heavenly Sword Hall was located in a vast area. It was not difficult to accommodate millions of people. More and more Nirvana Realm swordsmen were teleported over from various Sword God Hall branches. They arrived at the main God Hall and gathered together. In the blink of an eye, the 15th day had arrived, and a few 100,000 Rebirth Realm swordsmen were gathered here. There were more than a few 100,000 swordsmen who had reached the Nirvana Realm in the 4 major galaxies of the human race. However, most of them had chosen to give up. Some of them had obtained opportunities, and some of them were in seclusion. However, a few 100,000 Nirvana Realm swordsmen were enough to form an army. When a few 100,000 Nirvana Realm swordsmen gathered together, the aura that they exuded was extremely powerful. Even a Saint Realm expert of the Eternal Realm dared not underestimate them. I haven't seen you for 5 years, and your cultivation has indeed increased by 1 level. Lien Hongyun patted Chu Mu's shoulder and laughed. Aren't you the same? Chu Mu laughed. 5 years ago, Lien Hongyun's cultivation was at the middle stage of the 3rd sky of Nirvana Realm. Today, 5 years later, Lien Hongyun's cultivation was at the beginning stage of the 4th sky of Nirvana Realm. The higher one's cultivation was, the harder it was to increase one's cultivation. 5 years of seclusion was not only to increase one's cultivation, but also to improve one's swordsmanship and other aspects. It was already very good to be able to increase one's cultivation from the middle stage of the 3rd sky of Nirvana Realm to the beginning stage of the 4th sky of Nirvana Realm. Other than Lien Hongyun, Chu Mu also saw other monstrous geniuses on the Heaven Genius list. However, none of them could be compared to Lien Hongyun. Chu Mu and Lien Hongyun chatted casually. Occasionally, they would talk about their gains from the 5 years of seclusion as a form of communication. Among the large number of Nirvana Realm swordsmen, some knew each other, some didn't. Those who knew each other would greet each other and exchange information when they saw each other. Not long after, Yang Zhantian also came to the side and greeted Lien Hongyun and Chu Mu. "Brother Chu, let's fight now." After greeting each other, Yang Zhantian said very straightforwardly, "Do you think this is a suitable place?" Chu Mu laughed. With hundreds of thousands of Nirvana Realm swordsmen gathered here, it was obviously not a good place to fight. He felt helpless. This Yang Zhantian was really a battle maniac, worthy of being the successor of the 100 Battle faction. "All right, but if there's a suitable opportunity, I will definitely challenge you. You can't refuse." Yang Zhantian looked around and knew that this was not a suitable place to fight. "As you wish," Chu Mu said. "The successors of the 100 Battle faction are all so battle-hungry." Lien Hongyun shrugged and said. Facing Lien Hongyun's ridicule, Yang Zhantian didn't take it to heart. Their 100 Battles faction had this kind of style. Not just anyone could become the successor of the 100 Battles faction. One needed to possess an extraordinary battle intent, as well as an unyielding heart that dared to challenge everything. Once one became the successor of the 100 Battles faction, their battle intent and determination would be even stronger. Bai Yu stood not far away. His pupils seemed even deeper. Those who weren't as strong as him would unconsciously tremble when they looked at him. They would feel chills when they looked at him. Su Yueshi and Qin Aoxian arrived one after another. Gu Luankong also arrived. He looked the same as 5 years ago. He was still as lazy as before, as if nothing had changed at all. But no matter if it was Lien Hongyun or Yang Zhantian, they had all cultivated in seclusion for 5 years. Their cultivation must have increased by many folds. There was no reason for Gu Luankong to stay the same. After 5 years, His cultivation must have increased even more than Lien Hongyun and Yang Zhantian. Along with Gu Luankong was another person. It was a young girl wearing white clothes. Seeing everyone, her eyes darted around. She had a mischievous look on her face. She glanced around before her gaze landed on Chu Mu's face. "You're the Chu Mu that defeated my senior brother?" the white-clothed young woman crisply asked. "It should be me." Chu Mu smiled. From the girl's expression and words, Chu Mu thought that she was a simple person. She was also Gu Luankong's junior sister. He couldn't tell her age, but she should be quite young. Her cultivation was at the early stage of the second sky of Nirvana realm. She was quite talented. "I thought my senior brother was the most powerful among his generation. I didn't expect you to be even more powerful," the girl said directly. Gu Luankong didn't care, but the others smiled. "Junior sister Qiao Qiao, your senior brother will be sad if you say that." Lien Hongyun smiled. They all seemed to know this girl. This girl was indeed Gu Luankong's junior sister. She was one of the disciples of great Emperor Luan Tian. She volunteered to participate in the development of the Deep Blue World. Even Qin Aoxian and Su Yueshi smiled at Li Qiao Qiao. They looked like sisters taking care of their younger sister. At this moment, a huge starship appeared. Its enormous body emitted an icy cold feeling of metal, and it swept out like a storm. Instantly, it caused the hundreds of thousands of Rebirth Realm swordsmen in conversation to be stunned in unison, and then they turned around to look before revealing surprised expressions. The starship was completely black. It looked like it was going to merge with the starry sky. The cold aura it emitted seemed to freeze everyone's soul. If a swordsman below the Nirvana realm stood in front of such a huge starship, they would tremble unless their soul was strong. The length of the starship exceeded the star level by 10,000 meters. It was a star-level starship. Nebula-level starships were incomparably precious. The cost of each starship was astonishing. The energy required to operate each time was also astonishing. Normally, they wouldn't be used at all. This time, the Heavenly Sword Hall dispatched the rare nebula-level starships for the Deep Blue World. Although a star-level starship was precious, the Overlord-level forces would more or less have one. Some of the stronger Overlord-level forces might have 2 or even 3 star-level starships. Those Overlord-level forces would have at least 5 star-level starships. Of course, they wouldn't use them easily during normal times. The Heavenly Sword Hall also had a lot of starships. However, even Overlord-level forces might not have a star-level starship. Only some powerful Overlord-level forces might have a star-level starship. It was enough to show how precious it was. Even if the Heavenly Sword Hall was rich, they would rarely use a star-level starship. It was rumored that above the star-level starship, there was a higher-level starship. It was defined as a Starfield starship. A nebula-level starship was already extremely precious. The preciousness of a nebula-level starship was hard to imagine. It was rumored that there was only one nebula-level starship in the Heavenly Sword Hall. This nebula-level starship would only be mobilized when it was a matter of life and death. This star-level starship had the symbol of the Heavenly Sword Hall. It was in the shape of a sword. It was lifelike and emitted a shocking sharpness. It couldn't be faked. The starship was 100,000 meters long, 3,000 meters wide, and 2,000 meters tall. In theory, its internal space was hundreds of billions of cubic meters. After deducting some facilities, it was still hundreds of millions. It was enough to accommodate many people. Hundreds of thousands of Nirvana realm swordsmen were nothing. Chapter 1303. This was Chu Mu's first time riding on a nebula-level starship. It could even be said that this was the first time the hundreds of thousands of Nirvana realm swordsmen were riding on a nebula-level starship. Even though they knew that this was also a starship, but it was bigger and faster than the ones they had ridden before, they couldn't help but feel surprised and excited. This nebula-level starship was called the Hidden Vanguard, and Xiaoze was appointed as the captain of the Hidden Vanguard. Xiaoze was the captain of the previous Vanguard fleet. He had rich experience in space travel and was a high-level sword saint expert. He was powerful and had great adaptability. More importantly, he was the one who led the Vanguard fleet and discovered the Deep Blue World. He had detailed records of the star map and was very familiar with it. He was the most suitable captain of the Hidden Vanguard. Other than Xiaoze, there were other veterans of the Vanguard fleet who also entered the Hidden Vanguard to assist Xiaoze. These people had rich experience in piloting a starship and were more reassuring. They had worked together with Xiaoze for a long time and were easier to command. Other than Xiaoze and the others, the Hidden Vanguard also needed sufficient guards. The Heavenly Sword Hall sent a portion of the sword guards. Every sword guard had a powerful Eternal Realm cultivation base. Every sword guard had rich battle experience and could deal with all kinds of dangers in any harsh environment. Most importantly, there was a great emperor overseeing the Hidden Vanguard. He could deal with all kinds of dangers. When the hundreds of thousands of Nirvana Realm swordsmen boarded the Hidden Vanguard was activated under the gaze of many experts. It carried the hopes of many humans and left the Heavenly Sword Hall. It was also about to leave the human race's star domain and head into the depths of the universe to explore a new world. It was unknown if they could successfully explore a new world and make it a base for the human race. If they succeeded, the human race would have another base. They would be able to explore and research the Deep Blue World. The Deep Blue World was very wide and had rich resources. It would be of great help to the rise of the human race. On the contrary, if they failed, the human race would suffer heavy losses. Hundreds of thousands of Nirvana Realm swordsmen. Even if they were ordinary swordsmen, they were still a large force, not to mention that there were many monstrous geniuses among them. The situation inside Deep Blue World was uncertain, and the human race had to compete with the foreign races. It had to be said that the pressure of hundreds of thousands of Nirvana Realm swordsmen was great. The hidden edge was 100,000 meters long, and its maximum speed was 100,000 times the speed of sound. If it exceeded its limit, it could reach 120,000 times the speed of sound. However, because of its huge size, it could only increase its speed gradually, and could not reach its maximum speed all of a sudden. The huge and cold ship flew in the starry sky, leaving the Heavenly Sword Hall's main hall behind. It flew in the direction of the Deep Blue World and gradually increased its speed. When the hidden edge reached its maximum speed of 100,000 times, the starship was unbelievably fast. Even a saint-level expert's divine sense would have a hard time capturing it. It was too fast, unimaginably fast. As for the speed of 120,000 times, that was the limit, which would cause great damage to the starship. Normally, it would not be activated and would only be used in a life-and-death situation. Wherever Hidden Edge passed by at 100,000 times the speed of sound, space rippled, as if a vacuum tunnel had been torn open. If anything appeared in the vicinity, it would definitely be torn to shreds by the aura brought about by the starship's high-speed flight. The Hidden Edge was 2,000 meters tall, and it was divided into 99 floors. Each of the several 100,000 Nirvana Realm swordsmen was assigned a room. Aside from the rooms, there were also some public areas, such as the cafeteria, the sword arena, and so on. There were also some separate training rooms. It took Xiao Chen 5 years to return from the Deep Blue World. If he went back now, it would take him at least 2 or 3 years. 2 or 3 years couldn't be wasted. He couldn't even let go of his cultivation and sword practice. Chu Mu's room was at the edge of the starship. There was a transparent window that allowed him to see the scenery outside. It was dark, and because the starship was too fast, the life planets he saw were like meteors flashing by. Chu Mu stared outside the window for a while. Although it was very bright, after looking for a long time, he still found it hard to concentrate. He felt a little dizzy, so he quickly closed his eyes and calmed his mind. Only then did the dizziness slowly disappear. Chu Mu didn't mind because he knew that the dizziness was because the starship was too fast, and the life planets were still. When he looked at them, his mental power couldn't keep up. It was fine as long as he didn't look. In the end, it was because his spiritual power wasn't strong enough. If he had the spiritual power of the immemorial realm, he would be fine no matter how he looked. However, the immemorial realm was still a long time away. For now, he should just focus on his cultivation. Other than cultivation, the swordsmen would also leave their rooms and go to the sword practice room, the cafeteria, or the sword arena. The cafeteria provided good food and wine. It was available at any time. At Lien Hongyun's invitation, Chu Mu also came to the cafeteria. Otherwise, he would still be hiding in his room and cultivating. Apart from Lien Hongyun, Yang Zhantian was also there. "Brother Chu, have a drink." Yang Zhantian raised his cup. Yang Zhantian liked to fight and he also liked to drink. Most swordsmen didn't dislike drinking. Some of them even liked drinking because it was a kind of enjoyment. Some good wine had the effect of calming one's mind or refining one's vitality. Drinking it wouldn't harm the body, but would instead be beneficial. Chu Mu naturally wouldn't refuse Yang Zhantian's toast. He raised his cup and drank it. Just like that, the three of them chatted casually. Although their personalities were different, they could be considered as people with good temperament. Naturally, they could become friends. The previous fight could be considered as an exchange of blows. "Brother Ren, let me introduce you. This is Chu Mu, the first place of the Heavenly Youth list 5 years ago. He has the title of Starry Sky Sovereign." Suddenly, a voice sounded from nearby. Then, 2 people strode over with wine cups in their hands. Chu Mu and the other 2 turned around. They didn't know Lien Hongyun and Yang Zhantian, but Chu Mu recognized one of them. It was Qin Zhenyu, the one who brought Chun Gang to the 5 Elements sword sect to cause trouble. The one who spoke was Qin Zhenyu. He had a kind smile on his face. The other person was a man with a long face and an arrogant expression. Ren Jian's arrogant gaze fell on Chu Mu's face, sizing him up as if he wanted to see through Chu Mu. Then, a smile appeared on his face. "The early stage of the 3rd sky of Nirvana realm. I heard that the first place of the Heavenly Youth list is at the early stage of the 2nd sky of Nirvana realm. After obtaining the providence of the Heavenly Youth list and cultivating in seclusion for 5 years, you only managed to raise your cultivation by 1 sky. What he meant was that after obtaining the providence of the first place of the Heavenly Youth list and cultivating for 5 years, he only managed to raise his cultivation by 1 sky. He had let down the providence of the first place of the Heavenly Youth list." Lien Hongyun and Yang Zhantian's face darkened. Everyone could tell that Ren Jian was here to cause trouble. "Are you jealous?" Chu Mu asked back. "Jealous?" Ren Jian was startled at first, then he revealed a disdainful expression. "Why would I be jealous of a mere early stage of the 3rd sky of Nirvana realm? I don't know how many people like him I can kill." He said this because he was confident. His cultivation had reached the 6th level of the Nirvana realm, which far surpassed the 3rd level of the Nirvana realm. It was absolutely easy for him to deal with the 3rd level of the Nirvana realm with his cultivation at the 6th level of the Nirvana realm. He could instantly kill the 3rd level with a single strike. Even if Chu Mu's talent was outstanding and he was a super monstrous genius, he still couldn't fight against Ren Jian because this person himself was a genius. "Then why don't you try and see if your hand is hard enough?" Yang Zhantian said angrily. The successor of the 100 Battle sect loved to fight and had a fiery temper. Normally, it wouldn't be a big deal if they didn't provoke him. A mere 4th sky of Nirvana realm dares to talk nonsense. Ren Jian didn't seem to have a good temper. He coldly stared at Yang Zhantian. He could tell that Yang Zhantian was only at the 4th sky of Nirvana realm. "Renli, I haven't seen you for a few years. Your cultivation hasn't improved much, but your temper seems to have grown." A majestic voice sounded. Renli's face suddenly changed because the voice sounded very familiar. Even if he hadn't heard it for a few years, he wouldn't have forgotten it. Fang Juanzhan, this is none of your business. Renli's face returned to normal, but there was still a trace of fear in his eyes. Qin Zhenyu's face changed when he saw the person who had just arrived. The person who had just arrived was a tall and muscular man. He gave people the impression that he was a Vajra. He was extremely valiant, and there was a scar on his face which made his aura even more ferocious. You provoked my junior brother. How is it none of my business? Fang Juanzhan grinned. The scar on his face moved, making him look even more terrifying. Your junior brother. Renli's heart skipped a beat. Fang Juanzhan was from the 100 Battles faction, so his junior brother was naturally from the 100 Battles faction as well. The members of the 100 Battles faction were all warlike, and very protective of their own. So it's a disciple of the 100 Battles faction. Sorry for the disrespect. I still have something to do. Excuse me. As soon as he finished speaking, Renli turned around and hurriedly left. It was as if he was afraid that Fang Juanzhan would make him stay. Qin Zhenyu also didn't say anything. He also turned around and flew away. Qin Zhenyu had never thought that after Qin Gang's death, he would dislike Chu Mu even more. After that, when Chu Mu obtained the first place on the Heavenly Genius ranking, the Night Emperor praised him again. This made Qin Zhenyu jealous, and he couldn't tolerate Chu Mu anymore. Thus, when he found out about Chu Mu, he purposely called Renli over. Even if he couldn't directly deal with Chu Mu, he still wanted to find trouble for him. What he hadn't thought was that Fang Juanzhan's junior brother would be together with Chu Mu. Moreover, their relationship seemed to be pretty good. Instantly, he felt as if he had kicked an iron board. His foot hurt. To Qin Zhenyu and Renli, Fang Juanzhan was definitely the opponent that they didn't want to face the most. Chapter 1304. Qin Zhenyu and Renli's provocation didn't cause any terrible consequences. Therefore, no one mentioned it again. There was no need to. However, no matter if it was Lien Hongyun, Yang Zhantian, or Chu Mu, they all remembered it. Many thanks, senior brother Fang. Lien Hongyun raised her wine cup and thanked Fang Juanzhan. Chu Mu also raised his cup to express his gratitude. If it wasn't for Fang Juanzhan, facing Qin Zhenyu and Renli's provocation would have been troublesome. It's nothing. You're all little Zhan's friends. Fang Juanzhan also raised his cup and drained it in one gulp. Next time, if there are any blind people looking for trouble, don't hesitate to tell me. Then I'll thank Big Brother Fang in advance. Chu Mu smiled. Lien Hongyun and Yang Zhantian's disciples were more familiar with each other. Hence, disciples would address each other as senior and junior brothers. However, Chu Mu was different. Hence, he addressed Fang Juanzhan as Big Brother Fang. Fang Juanzhan's age surpassed Chu Mu by at least 10 years. Brother Chu, I hope you can grow stronger as soon as possible. At that time, you can fight with me again. Fang Juanzhan's eyes gleamed with sharpness, exuding the aura of a battle maniac. Okay. Chu Mu agreed straightforwardly. As expected, straightforward. Fang Juanzhan laughed loudly. His laughter was loud and clear, attracting the attention of the surrounding people. Many people recognized Fang Juanzhan and knew what kind of personality he had. Hence, they didn't stop him. Otherwise, they would be looking for trouble. Oh right, Renli is a despicable person. After being humiliated this time, he will definitely hold a grudge against you all. Especially your brother Chu, be careful. Fang Juanzhan reminded, however, with Brother Chu's talent, it won't be long before he surpasses Renli. After saying that, Fang Juanzhan drank another cup of wine and stood up to leave. After Fang Juanzhan left, Chu Mu asked a question. Yang Zhantian started to explain. The reason why Renli and Qin Zhenyu's faces changed so drastically upon seeing Fang Juanzhan was like a mouse seeing a cat. It was very likely that they had been taught a lesson by Fang Juanzhan. Before Fang Juanzhan had become the successor of the 100 Battles Division, he had been extremely belligerent. He had gone around challenging people. After becoming the successor of the 100 Battles Division, he had gone into seclusion for a period of time to cultivate. When he came out of seclusion, he had once again gone around challenging people. His opponents were basically the successors of other emperors, as well as some martial grandmasters and genius disciples of great powers. Naturally, there were winners and losers in challenges. Regardless of whether Fang Juanzhan won or lost, he would change to another challenger. If he lost, he would cultivate and challenge again until he defeated his opponent. It could be said that Fang Juanzhan's strength was obtained through countless challenges. His strength, his tenacity, and his soaring fighting spirit were a nightmare for his opponent. Once he was targeted by Fang Juanzhan, he would definitely challenge him no matter what. Qin Zhenyu and Renli had been challenged by Fang Juanzhan before and weren't his match. They understood Fang Juanzhan very well and wouldn't want to offend a battle maniac like him. Fang Juanzhan's appearance is just a coincidence. Wait until we enter the deep blue world. There will be plenty of opportunities, Qin Zhenyu said to Renli. Their gazes were still sizing up Chu Mu. On the hidden edge, there were hundreds of thousands of Nirvana Realm swordsmen. The lowest cultivation was at the first sky of Nirvana Realm, while the highest was at the 9th sky of Nirvana Realm. For someone like Chu Mu, he was absolutely invincible in the lower levels of the Nirvana Realm. However, it would be difficult for him to fight against someone in the middle levels of the Nirvana Realm. It would be impossible for him to fight against someone in the upper levels of the Nirvana Realm. However, the Deep Blue World would be an opportunity. With the blessing of the Heaven Azure list, the opportunities he would encounter in the Deep Blue World would surpass others. At 100,000 times the speed of sound, the hidden edge rapidly flew towards the 4 major star domains of the human race. In the starry sky, there was no difference between day and night. However, there was still the flow of time. Day after day passed. The swordsmen cultivated and communicated in the starship. They were constantly using various methods to improve themselves. In a sword training room, there was only Chu Mu and a human-shaped sword testing rock. Chu Mu was practicing his sword. Chu Mu's sword art was the ancient archaic sword art. Streaks of ancient archaic sword chi shot out, sword moves changed, and sword light flashed. All of them were slashed on the sword testing rock. The sword testing rock was also very strong. No matter how Chu Mu's sky beheading sword slashed, it only left scratches on its surface before disappearing. After 5 years of cultivation, Chu Mu had completely grasped the essence of the ancient archaic sword art. Now, he continued to cultivate because he wanted to break through the limitations of the ancient archaic sword art. He wanted to integrate his own ideas into the ancient archaic sword art and improve its power. Even though he had already grasped the essence of the ancient archaic sword technique, and even though Chu Mu had shocking comprehension, it wasn't that easy to improve the ancient archaic sword technique. Chu Mu was currently repeatedly cultivating it in order to verify some of his thoughts. Chu Mu was working hard, and the other swordsmen were also working hard. After all, the Deep Blue World meant unknown opportunities and unknown dangers. It could be said that the Deep Blue World wasn't the first new world discovered by the human race. It was the first world to be explored with Nirvana Realm swordsmen. Using Nirvana Realm swordsmen to explore a new world for the first time was a risk. After all, Nirvana Realm swordsmen weren't weak, but they weren't strong either. At least compared to Immemorial Realm swordsmen, the difference was too great. Even a 9th Heavens Nirvana Realm genius swordsman wouldn't be able to withstand a sword strike from an Immemorial First Heavens sword saint. After completing the cultivation of the ancient archaic sword art, Chu Mu kept his sword and flicked his finger. In an instant, a strand of silver slashed out and bombarded the sword testing stone with indescribable speed. He flicked his finger again and another strand of silver slashed out. This was void-pierced sword chi. After cultivating the void-pierced sword chi in seclusion for 5 years, a void-pierced sword chi divine mark was condensed in his dantian. This divine mark was the origin. With this divine mark origin, as long as Chu Mu didn't overuse his void-pierced sword chi, he could quickly replenish his void-pierced sword chi after releasing it. Just like what he was doing now. With a flick of his finger, he would release a strand of void-pierced sword chi. The interval between each strand of void-pierced sword chi was less than 3 breaths. Void-pierced sword chi was a powerful ordinary supreme art. He could release 1 strand of void-pierced sword chi every 3 breaths. It would greatly increase Chu Mu's strength. Chu Mu also estimated that if he released the divine mark regardless of the consequences, the power would be 10 times stronger than ordinary void-pierced sword chi. However, the price would be the shattering of the divine mark, and he would need to condense it again. After releasing the void-pierced sword chi a few times, he raised the sky/sword. Silver light flickered on the sword, and there were cracks on the edge of the sword. Those were the cracks caused by the space being cut open. Intense spatial energy fluctuations rippled out, causing people's hearts to palpitate. He slashed out with the sword. Under the sword, a strand of silver slashed through the void. Everywhere it passed, the space collapsed, shattered, and compressed. The terrifying aura of nirvanic extermination extinguished all life and shattered everything. Everything under the sword, regardless of whether it was hard or soft, was annihilated and turned into nothingness. High-grade supreme art, void nirvana sword. With 1 slash, the void shattered and everything was annihilated. As a high-grade supreme art, even though Chu Mu had only grasped the basics, its power was several times stronger than the void-pierced sword chi. It was extremely terrifying. Under the void nirvana sword, the upper half of the sword testing stone was shattered. It was as though it was annihilated in the void and disappeared. After that, it recovered bit by bit. After practicing the supreme art, Shao Chen left and returned to his room. He sat down cross-legged and practiced the divine desolate sword art before cultivating the star's calamity. All pioneers, please take note. The starship is about to enter a space-time transition. Please stay in your room and don't wander around. All pioneers, please take note. The starship is about to enter a space-time transition. Please stay in your room and don't wander around. All pioneers, please take note. The starship is about to enter a space-time transition. Please stay in your room and don't wander around. A somewhat cold voice rang out 3 times in a row, entering everyone's ears. The objective of the hundreds of thousands of Nirvana Realm swordsmen was to explore the deep blue world. Therefore, they were called pioneers. As for the space-time transition, it was a special technique of the starship. Only starships that had reached the star level could grasp the space-time transition ability. The space-time transition ability of a star system-level starship was naturally much stronger than that of a star-level starship. The so-called space-time transition was when a starship expended a large amount of energy to open up a space-time wormhole. After entering the wormhole, it would undergo a space-time transition. Every space-time transition would consume a large amount of energy. Furthermore, because of the risks involved in the space-time transition, starships below the star level would not be able to withstand the pressure of the space-time wormhole. Once they entered, they would shatter and be annihilated in the space-time wormhole, disappearing completely. The human race's star field was not suitable for large-scale space-time transitions. They were afraid that it would affect the stability of life planet. Therefore, the Hidden Edge only began the space-time transition after leaving the human race's star field and entering the outer space of the human race's star field. After the voice rang out 3 times, every swordsman returned to their room. Their room also activated the relevant ceiling formation to form a protective barrier. The countdown began and the space-time transition was about to begin. Looking from the outside, strands of electric energy could be seen on the surface of the Hidden Edge. They spread out and covered the entire starship. It seemed like the hidden edge was twisting. The hidden edge's speed continued to increase, surpassing the limit of 100,000 times. A vortex suddenly appeared in the dark space in front of the hidden edge. It spun at a high speed like a black hole that could devour everything. No light could escape. The hidden edge crashed into the vortex and seemed to be devoured. In the blink of an eye, the huge hidden edge that was 100,000 meters long disappeared into the vortex. The vortex rapidly rotated and then collapsed inward. In the end, it condensed into a single point and disappeared. The dark space did not ripple at all. It was as if everything that had just happened was just an illusion. Countless strands of grotesque and variegated light were twisted, as if they were in a dream-like world. A sense of confusion seeped into the starship from the outside and affected the swordsman. Chapter 1305. Time and space were the most mysterious of the forces of heaven and earth. Since ancient times, there had been a saying that time was king and space was supreme. As the name implied, the power of time was the king of all the forces of heaven and earth. It was the strongest force of heaven and earth that no other force of heaven and earth could compare to. Space was supreme. In other words, the power of time was not included. The power of space was the supreme of all the forces of heaven and earth. It was the most powerful force of heaven and earth apart from the power of time. Time and space formed a universe, a starry sky, and a world. Without time and space, no world could exist. A world could have no fire, no water, no wind, and so on, but it could not have no time and space. Time and space were the foundation of everything. At this moment, the hidden edge rapidly advanced through the space-time wormhole. It was like a submarine diving into the deep sea. It faced the undercurrents at the bottom of the sea and constantly advanced. Within the space-time wormhole, there were countless rays of light. They were colorful and dazzling. The rays of light were actually rays of energy formed by the power of time and space. These rays of energy possessed terrifying power. Once struck, one would rapidly age and eventually die from old age. Or they would rapidly rejuvenate and become an infant before returning to nothingness. In short, if one did not have any protective measures within the space-time wormhole, there was nothing to be happy about once one was struck by a ray of space-time energy. This was because the end result would be death. Under the space-time wormhole, one would be reduced to nothingness. Hidden Vanguard was undergoing a space-time warp. A layer of energy was distributed on the surface of the space-time warp, resisting the corrosion of space-time energy rays. Otherwise, the entire starship would have been silently destroyed, along with all the lives on board. Even though it was protected by a layer of protective energy, after the space-time energy beam hit the starship's protective layer, a trace of it still penetrated the starship's protective layer and dissipated. However, the amount of space-time energy that penetrated the starship was extremely small. The starship was 100,000 meters long and several thousand meters wide and tall. The interior space was extremely large. After the sparse space-time energy was dispersed, it became even thinner. Some ceiling formations were activated in every room, further dispersing the space-time energy, causing the danger of the space-time energy entering the room to be reduced once more. The effect on the Nirvana Realm swordsmen was reduced to a minimum, so they could completely resist it. Inside the colorful space-time wormhole, rays of light were constantly spinning and twisting, as though it was a dreamlike world. In the room, Chu Mu sat cross-legged and circulated the Divine Desolate Sword Manual, dispelling the invasion of the fine space-time energy. In the other rooms, every swordsman did the same thing as Chu Mu. They used their own strength to resist the invasion of the thin space-time energy to prevent it from harming their bodies. Why don't I take this opportunity to further comprehend the power of space? Suddenly, a thought jumped out from the depths of Chu Mu's mind. As soon as it appeared, it immediately became uncontrollable and became more and more intense. This was actually a risky method, but Chu-Mu dared to do it because he had a strong physique. His physique that cultivated the astral calamity cultivation technique had reached the early stages of the third firmament of the nirvana realm, which was the second level of the astral calamity cultivation technique. It was because of his strong physique that he could better resist the corrosion of the space-time energy. If it was any other third firmament nirvana swordsman, they would not be able to resist it with their bodies. As soon as the thought appeared, Chu-Mu took action and stopped the circulation of the divine desolate sword manual. Immediately, without the resistance of the sword origin, the thin space-time energy quickly invaded Chu-Mu's body, wanting to cause damage to Chu-Mu's body. However, his strong physique withstood it. After carefully sensing it, Chu-Mu realized that with just his physique, he could resist the corrosion of the space-time energy for a long period of time without being damaged. It was the best time to comprehend the power of space. Calming his mind, he activated the power of the rules of space in his spiritual world. He slowly adjusted his frequency with the space-time energy in the outside world and started to vibrate. Immediately, the deeper mysteries of the power of space appeared in Chu-Mu's mind bit by bit. It tempered the power of the rules of space and increased the level of control of the power of space bit by bit. Some of the sword saints of the eternal realm also gave up on resisting. Although they didn't have a body-tempering cultivation, their bodies were many times stronger than those of the nirvana realm. Thus, they were able to resist the thin space-time energy. However, what the sword saints of the eternal realm comprehended was the power of laws. It was a power that was of a higher level than the power of rules. It was also a power that was of a deeper level than the power of heaven and earth. Therefore, the thin space-time energy was not of much use to the sword saint. As a super genius, Gu Luankong also thought of this point. He used a special technique to form a layer of protection on the surface of his body. After that, he stopped using his cultivation method and started to remove the power of time from the thin space-time energy. He absorbed the power of space and used it to comprehend the power of space. There were some sword saints like Chu-Mu and Gu Luankong, but most of them could only resist the power of space. Not everyone could comprehend the power of space, let alone the power of time. In the space-time wormhole, one could not feel the flow of time. It could be a few years or even a few decades, but it could also be a few years or a few decades. No matter if it was the flow of time or the flow of time, it would eventually return to the starting point. As he continued to comprehend, Chu-Mu's power of the rules of space went from the early stage of the subtle level to the middle stage of the subtle level. When the power of the rules of space reached the late stage of the subtle level, Chu-Mu felt a bottleneck. No matter how hard he tried, how much he comprehended, and how much he refined, he could not make any progress. However, to be able to refine the power of the rules of space from the early stage of the subtle level to the late stage of the subtle level, this improvement was not small at all. After 5 years of closed-door cultivation, with the help of the secret codex of the Void Breaker, the space power of the rules of space was still at the subtle level. It had only improved a little and was more stable. After checking his spiritual world, among the 10 rules of heaven and earth, his mastery of the rules of space was the most profound. It had reached the late stage of the subtle level, followed by the rules of 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. 5 years ago, during the Supreme Challenge, Chu-Mu's rules of wood had reached the early stage of the subtle level. In these 5 years, Chu-Mu did not take the initiative to cultivate, but because of the 5 Elements Sutra, under the guidance of the rules of wood, the other 4 rules of space had a breakthrough and reached the early stage of the subtle level. Among the 5 rules of space, the rules of wood had the deepest level. It was close to the middle stage of the subtle level. The other 4 were slightly weaker, but they were still at the early stage of the subtle level. The rules of thunder were still at the peak of the subtle level. The rules of wind were also at the peak of the subtle level. The rules of cloud and ice were at the peak of the fundamental level. It seemed that they could break through to the subtle level at any time. Such a large leap in level between the 10 types of rule forces was also due to Chu-Mu himself. Among them, the cloud rule and ice rule were the least used and the least cultivated, so their level was the lowest. Although the wind and thunder rule forces were commonly used, they lacked the corresponding refining method. Adding on the lack of time, the progress was very slow. As for the 5 elemental forces, one was due to the support of the wood phase origin, the second was due to the independent cultivation of the 5 elemental scripture, and the third was due to the 5 elemental forces. As for the rules of space, he had the secret codex of the Voidbreaker. Perhaps before Chu-Mu transformed the rules of space into rules of space, his mastery of the rules of space would most likely reach the level of heavenly fusion. As this thought flashed through his mind, the hidden edge was still shuttling through the space-time wormhole. Why don't I take this opportunity to see if I can comprehend the power of time? Suddenly, Chu-Mu's eyes lit up. Comprehending more of the power of heaven and earth had both advantages and disadvantages. Chu-Mu was very clear about the advantages and disadvantages. But if it were an ordinary power of heaven and earth, Chu-Mu would definitely give up. This was because he had barely used the rules of cloud and ice. But the power of time was different. It was much stronger than the power of space. As this thought flashed through his mind, Chu-Mu didn't hesitate to comprehend it. He had once used the compass of time and the sand of time. At that time, he had wanted to comprehend the power of time. Unfortunately, he hadn't been able to gain anything. This was a rare opportunity, but Chu-Mu didn't know if he could comprehend it. He could only try his best. He allowed the thin space-time energy to enter his body and easily dispelled the power of space. He focused on the power of time, using his mind and divine sense to touch it. Time was the most ruthless thing. No matter what it was, it would fade away under time. It could make happiness disappear, it could make pain forget, it could make people immerse themselves in time. It was like the master of everything. No power could resist the flow of time. And it was immortal. No matter what era it was, no matter where it was, the power of time would exist. No matter how the world changed, no matter how much time passed, time would always exist. It was immortal and everlasting. All sorts of comprehensions appeared in Chu-Mu's mind, circling around in chaos. As Chu-Mu comprehended, he sorted them out. Gradually, he gained a deeper understanding of the power of time. Gradually, Chu-Mu grasped a trace of the true meaning of the power of time. When the conditions were right, he naturally comprehended a trace of the power of time, reaching the level of the concept of time. This was a good start. Time was king. It was the king of all the powers of the world. No power of the world could resist the erosion of time. Wanting to comprehend the power of time was much more difficult than comprehending the power of space. This was also why there were so few people who could grasp the power of time. In the past, Chu-Mu didn't have enough knowledge and foundation, so it was impossible for him to comprehend the power of time. After experiencing it again and again, his understanding of the power of time had deepened. He had also had several opportunities to come in contact with the power of time. Today, under a series of coincidences, he finally comprehended the power of time and grasped it. Chapter 1306. The power of time was mysterious. Chu-Mu was immersed in it and forgot about everything. The huge hidden edge starship was like a whale swimming in the deep sea. It rapidly advanced through the space-time wormhole and welcomed the countless space-time energy rays. The end was the starting point of the countless space-time energy rays. It also seemed to be the end point. With a point as the center, space-time energy rays constantly radiated in all directions. They twisted and shot backwards, hitting the starship or brushing past it. That point was like the starting point of space-time, the origin of the universe. The hidden edge crashed into the origin at 100,000 times the speed of sound. There was no earth-shattering explosion. The origin was like an illusion. The hidden edge sank into the origin and quickly disappeared. On the other side of the starry sky, it was quiet and deep. Suddenly, as if an ancient sea beast had charged out of the deep sea, it appeared from the depths of the starry sky. First, it had a sharp head. Soon, a huge body emitting a cold aura also appeared in the starry sky. The hidden edge had finished its space-time transition and appeared from the space-time wormhole. The huge body of 100,000 meters seemed so insignificant compared to the vast starry sky. In front of the hidden edge, there was a deep blue light that was as bright as a star. A single space-time transition had actually crossed an immeasurable distance, approaching the deep blue world from outside the 4 major star zones of the human race. That's right, the bright star emitting a deep blue light was the deep blue world. However, it was still some distance away, so it only looked like a small dot. Just like the hidden edge, there were starships of various shapes and sizes in the distant starry sky. They were all starships of foreign races that had come through the space-time wormhole. With a loud rumble, the hidden edge starship advanced at full speed towards the deep blue world. There were many races that had discovered the deep blue world at the same time. After returning, the other races would more or less get the news through various channels and interfere. The deep blue world was an unknown world with life. It was unknown whether there was a powerful force guarding it. If there was, entering the deep blue world would be tantamount to an invasion. Just think about yourself. What do you do when you encounter invaders? Kill them all. You want to invade your world and take the resources of your world? How can you be merciful and soft-hearted? Therefore, in order to break through the defenses of the deep blue world and let the Nirvana realm swordsmen in, they had to act quickly. They had to enter before the natives of the deep blue world reacted. Once the natives of the deep blue world reacted, they would definitely take corresponding measures to stop them. Simply put, if there were no experts in the deep blue world, then everyone would be happy. If there were experts, then they had to race against time and open up the defenses of the deep blue world before the other races and send in hundreds of thousands of Nirvana realm swordsmen. As for their fate after entering, it would depend on their own ability and luck. After Hidden Edge ended its spacetime jump and left the spacetime wormhole, Chu Mu's comprehension of the power of time came to an end. Inside the room, Chu Mu's fingers had traces of mysterious energy fluctuations. This energy was like silk and couldn't be seen or touched. The surroundings of the strands of energy seemed a little strange. This is the power of time. It is indeed more profound and mystical than the power of space. Chu Mu felt the strands of energy between his fingers and exclaimed inwardly. A time and space jump had allowed him to comprehend the power of time. From the very beginning of the time intent domain, he had continuously deepened it, reaching perfection in an instant. He had broken through and transformed it into a profound meaning. Then, he continued to improve it, going from minor completion to major completion and then to perfection. After the profound of time had reached the limit of 9 refinements, Chu Mu planned to transform the profound of time into the power of time law in one go. However, Hidden Edge ended its spacetime jump and left the spacetime wormhole. This caused Chu Mu's perception of the power of time to weaken by 100-fold. He had reached a bottleneck. After trying it out, he discovered that the bottleneck was very stubborn and hard to move. He could only give up for now. Unfortunately, although the power of time was mystical and powerful, surpassing the power of space, the profound of time couldn't compare to the power of space law. The power of the profound of time couldn't be compared to the power of space law, let alone the power of space law that had reached the late stage of the profound realm. But no matter what was said, this was a good start. At this point, the power of heaven and earth Chu Mu grasped increased from 10 to 11. Hidden Edge was racing against time. It actually burst out at a speed of 120,000 times the speed of sound and flew towards the deep blue world without caring about the cost. As Hidden Edge advanced, the deep blue light became clearer and clearer. After a while, the vast deep blue world seemed to be right in front of them. The 100,000-meter-long hidden edge was like a mayfly in front of a boundless ocean in front of the deep blue world. Hidden Edge stopped in front of a corner of the deep blue world. The starship's door quickly opened and figures came out of the starship. They were all sword saint experts of the eternal realm. There were no less than 10,000 sacred rank powerhouses, and the weakest among them was a mid-level sword saint. Over 10,000 mid-level and high-level sword saints appeared in a corner of the deep blue world after leaving the starship. They lined up and formed a huge battle formation. The other 10,000 sword saints formed a completely different battle formation. Extremely powerful auras erupted from the sword saints. Beams of colorful light that could be seen with the naked eye soared into the sky. They were like fireflies in the dark and vast starry sky. At the same time, in other corners of the deep blue world, sword saints of the other races appeared one after another. They formed a formation and released their powerful energy, which was condensed through the formation. In the battle formation formed by the human sword saints, strands of light flowed continuously. The flowing light flowed through the swords in the hands of the sword saints and gathered in the sky. Gradually, the silhouette of a sword was formed, as if it was hammered by an invisible hammer. However, this sword seemed to be a little bigger. It was several thousand meters long. An incomparably tyrannical sharpness radiated from the 1,000-meter-long energy sword, sweeping out in all directions, shaking the dark and deep starry sky. Layer by layer, it was like an endless wave, becoming more and more tyrannical and astonishing as the giant sword condensed. In another place, the sword saints of the underworld god clan condensed a dark black spear. It was called the Underworld God Spear. The light of the deep blue world was still as calm as before. It didn't know that it was going to welcome a storm of attacks. All pioneers, pay attention. Once the passage opens, immediately leave the starship and enter the passage. A voice rang out and entered the ears of every Nirvana Realm sword saint. Remember your mission. Find the world spirit of the deep blue world and obtain its recognition. Open the protective power of the deep blue world, and let the sword saints of your race enter. Every world with life had a center. It was called the world spirit. Once you obtained the recognition of the world spirit, you could obtain simple authority to open or close the protective power of the world. Regardless of whether it was the human race or the other races, their mission was the same. Find the world spirit and obtain its recognition. Then, open the protective power of the deep blue world, and let the sword saints of their race enter. From there, they would truly control the entire world. Every Nirvana Realm sword saint was excited. They were ready to rush out of the starship and into the deep blue world as soon as the order was given. The starry sky was filled with countless rays. Most of these rays were corrosive to the human body. The bodies of the Eternal Realm sword saints were completely reborn. They were not afraid of the rays in the starry sky. The bodies of the Nirvana Realm sword saints were in the process of transformation. They were far inferior to the bodies of the Eternal Realm sword saint. However, they could still resist the corrosion of the rays for a short period of time. Sword slash! A loud roar resounded through the starry sky. The 1,000-meter-long energy sword suddenly flew up, approached the deep blue world, and slashed forward. There was a loud rumble. The terrifying momentum shook the heavens and the earth. Terrifying shock waves spread in all directions, causing the dark starry sky to boil. The terrifying aura of sharpness transmitted into the starship, causing everyone's expression to change drastically. Under the slash of the energy sword, the deep blue light was immediately cut open, and the energy sword continued to thrust into the gap, deepening the gap. The defensive power of the deep blue world naturally resisted, causing the hole to shrink bit by bit. At the same time, the Nirvana Realm sword saints also received the order. They quickly rushed out of the starship, like arrows released from a bow, and rushed into the passage opened by the energy sword. The battle formation formed by the other 10,000 Saint Realm Sword Saints also released powerful energy into the passage. They resisted the defensive power of the deep blue world, causing the hole in the passage to shrink rapidly. The Nirvana Realm Sword Saints burst forth with all their speed. The hundreds of thousands of Nirvana Realm Sword Saints felt like a swarm of locusts. Chumu was also among the crowd. As the hundreds of thousands of Nirvana Realm Sword Saints entered, the defensive power of the passage also followed inside. The 10,000 Saint Realm Sword Saints all had serious expressions. They burst forth with all their power because they all knew that this was extremely important. Aside from the human race, the Underworld God Clan and other foreign races also released their own methods to break through the defensive power of the Deep Blue World, allowing the younger generations of their clans to enter. Suddenly, the passage shrank by a lot. Moreover, there were all sorts of powerful forces interfering from the inside, causing the Saint Realm Sword Saints' expressions to change drastically. They ignored their own consumption and burst forth with power once again to stabilize the passage. At the very least, they had to ensure that the Sword Saints successfully entered the Deep Blue World. Otherwise, all their previous efforts would be wasted. The hundreds of thousands of Nirvana Realm Sword Saints would die under the power of the Deep Blue World. Chu Mu and the others burst forth with all their power and advanced at full speed. Immediately after, the entire passage began to shake. Everyone's expression changed drastically as they were attacked by external forces. The forces maintained the stability of the passage. They constantly collided with each other, creating storms that swept out. Some of the Sword Saints were caught in the storm and their bodies shattered under the terrifying energy storm. Miserable cries echoed, causing everyone to tremble in fear. A storm swept towards Chumu. Chapter 1307. In the Deep Blue World, some experts attacked the void passage that appeared, causing the void passage to become even more unstable. As the void passage shook, a terrifying storm wreaked havoc. This void passage needed stability the most. If it wasn't stable enough, it might cause the void passage to collapse. Outside the Deep Blue World, the Sacred Rank experts all had serious expressions. They were using all their strength to maintain the stability of the passage. They were trying their best to buy time for their juniors to enter the Deep Blue World. The Deep Blue World's defensive power was very strong. The energy sword was constantly being opened, and as it moved forward, it rapidly shrank. By the time the void passage was completely opened, the energy sword was already half consumed. The void passage's opening was naturally blocked by the Deep Blue World's defensive power. All sorts of fluctuations were discovered by the native experts of the Deep Blue World, and they attacked the void passage. Storms were everywhere. Many Nirvana Realm experts were drawn into the storm and were crazily killed. The Nirvana Realm experts wouldn't just sit there and wait for death. They all used up their strength to resist. Once their strength was exhausted, they would be killed by the storm. Seeing their fellow clansmen being killed by the storm, they couldn't help but feel nervous and even frightened. Chumu was also drawn into a storm. He quickly mobilized the Divine Wilderness sword energy around his body to resist the storm. At the same time, he took out the Heaven Beheading Sword and attacked the storm. The storm was very powerful. The Divine Wilderness sword energy's defensive power was shattered. Chumu's sword also slashed a hole in the storm. With a burst of strength, he quickly drilled out of the hole. Basically, those who were drawn into the storm and died were swordsmen with lower cultivation. After the energy sword opened up the passage, it was only a few hundred meters long. When it rushed out of the passage, it suddenly exploded and turned into countless sharp sword chi. It shot out in all directions, as if it had pierced through the void of the Deep Blue World. It covered a radius of a few 100,000 meters. Dodge! The Deep Blue World's experts' faces changed. The power of the sword chi made them feel the threat of death. The native experts of the Deep Blue World all retreated. They had no choice. Although they weren't weak, they were considered weak among the Sacred Rank. The main reason was that this place was located at the edge of the deep blue world. They were closer to this place and had arrived early. The stronger experts would still need some time to arrive. At that moment, many figures rushed out of the void tunnel. They all took out a piece of jade and crushed it. A surge of energy wrapped around their bodies, increasing their speed by 10 times. In an instant, they shot out in all directions, leaving the void tunnel. Before they came, they had already made the necessary preparations. Every Nirvana Realm swordsman had obtained a piece of speed jade. After crushing it, they would obtain the power of speed, allowing them to erupt with 10 times their original speed. It was just right for this moment. Kill them all. Don't let them escape. A native expert noticed the situation and immediately roared. Many experts scattered and chased after him. In the eyes of the natives of the deep blue world, outsiders were demons from beyond the heavens. In the end, the sword chi dissipated and the void passage was attacked again. This time, the attack was even more intense than before. The void passageway shook violently, and the storm grew stronger. At this moment, only the majority of the people had rushed out of the void passageway, and a small number of them were still inside. The void passageway trembled incessantly, and the fluctuations seemed to be on the verge of destruction. The storms became denser and more tyrannical, and countless streams of energy shot out in all directions. "Let's go!" Everyone's expression changed drastically as they quickly crushed the speed jade. The power of speed wrapped around their bodies, increasing their speed by 10 times. They quickly rushed out of the void passage. The speed jade was a one-time use secret treasure. It was one of the strategic reserves of the Heavenly Sword Hall. It could increase the speed of a Nirvana Realm cultivator by 10 times. It was worth a few $100,000. The function of this one-time use secret treasure was to allow everyone to use it after they rushed out of the void passage. It would increase their speed and allow them to quickly escape the pursuit that might appear. After that, they would have to integrate into the deep blue world. After that, they would have to use their own ability to find the location of the world spirit. After that, they would have to come into contact with it and obtain the recognition of the world spirit. Now that the void passage was trembling as if it was about to be destroyed, they had no choice but to use the speed jade. With their speed increased by 10 times, they immediately rushed towards the exit of the void passage. However, the exit of the void passage was constantly shrinking, and there were terrifying energy rays at the edge. Some of the swordsmen were still hit and were instantly torn apart. Chumu also had no choice but to take out the speed jade. After crushing the speed jade, a mysterious power wrapped around his body. His speed suddenly increased by 10 times. He controlled his body and rushed towards the void passage. After narrowly avoiding an energy ray, Chumu was covered in cold sweat. Suddenly, countless lights appeared in front of him. He rushed out of the void passage. While the power of the speed jade was still there, Chumu quickly chose a direction and flew at full speed. From the corner of his eyes, he caught a glimpse of streaks of light shooting in all directions like meteors. At this time, it was impossible to form an effective organization. They could only try their best to escape and slowly integrate into this world. Hundreds of thousands of Nirvana Realm swordsmen were scattered in the deep blue world. They were like a school of sardines in the vast ocean. It was hard to find them. Suddenly, Chumu, who was flying at high speed, felt his body tremble. An indescribable chill quickly spread throughout his body. Immediately after, a terrifying killing intent pierced through the air and landed on Chumu's body like maggot. This caused Chumu's heart to explode with a sense of crisis. He once again exploded with speed. "Outer Heaven Demon, don't run!" A cold and stiff voice came from afar. It was very sharp. Chumu could understand it because this language was similar to the human language. It was just that there was some accent, so it sounded a little strange. Hearing this voice, Chumu suddenly felt a little relieved. At least the language of the deep blue world was similar to that of the outside world. It would be easier for him to integrate into this world and complete his mission. However, before that, he still had to shake off the pursuit. The aura emitted by the pursuer let Chu Mu know that it wasn't something he could fight against. That's right, the pursuer of Chu Mu was a Saint Realm expert. Although he was only a low-level Saint Realm expert, his strength was countless times stronger than Chu Mu. There was no comparison between the two. Die, outer space demon. The cold and harsh voice rang out once again as it drew closer. Then, the saint-level expert who was chasing after Chu Mu fought in the air. Purple aura spread wildly and turned into a purple flame that was filled with demonic chi, wanting to burn everything into ashes. The purple flame, which was filled with a destructive aura, was like a purple meteor. As it burned fiercely, it dragged a long flame tail and bombarded Chu Mu. The aura of death caused Chu Mu to be inexplicably horrified. He felt that even his soul was trembling, as if he were hit, his body and soul would be destroyed under the purple flames, turning into nothingness. Chu Mu wanted to dodge, but the purple flame had locked onto him. It was extremely fast and was not any slower than him, so there was no way for him to dodge. At the critical moment, Chu Mu remembered that he still had a trump card, the last strand of Heavenly Wasteland Sword Chi. Back then, the second palace master of the Heaven Wasteland Earth Palace had left 3 for him. He had already used 2 of them, and the last one was about to be used up. Without any emotion or hesitation, Chu Mu immediately activated the last strand of Heavenly Wasteland Sword Chi. The Heavenly Wasteland Sword Chi appeared and enveloped Chu Mu. Then, the purple flame bombarded the Heavenly Wasteland Sword Chi. This strand of Heavenly Wasteland Sword Chi was able to withstand a full blow from a low-level Saint Realm expert. The purple flame instantly collided with the Heavenly Wasteland Sword Chi and exploded. Although Chu Mu was not injured, under the impact of the powerful collision and explosion, his speed once again increased by several times, and he flew into the distance like a meteorite. The big explosion blocked the view of the pursuers, and the energy shock wave exploded. The tyrannical power was so strong that even a low-level Saint Realm expert did not dare to underestimate it. He hurriedly used his power to disperse the energy shock wave, and his speed once again exploded as he chased after Yi Qingyu. No matter what, he would not let this otherworldly demon escape from under his nose. The experts behind him continued to chase after him. Chu Mu knew that with his speed, it was impossible for him to escape. Even if he used other life-saving trump cards, he would only be able to hold on for a while. He gritted his teeth and made up his mind. He immediately activated the power of the rules of space with all his strength, regardless of the cost. He used all his strength to display the advanced unique skill, the Void Nirvana Sword. As if sensing Chu Mu's anxiety at this moment, and realizing that Chu Mu was in danger at this moment, the void-breaking secret manual suddenly trembled. It shone brightly and buzzed. A tyrannical void-breaking power surged out of Chu Mu's mind and into the heaven-beheading sword in Chu Mu's hand. Under the powerful void-breaking power, Chu Mu swung his sword. Advanced unique skill, the Void Nirvana Sword. The Void Nirvana Sword that was infused with the void-breaking power was several times stronger. Under the sword, the void in front of Chu Mu was directly split open. It was as if a huge beast had opened its mouth. A pitch-black crack appeared before Chu Mu's eyes. A terrifying suction force surged out, and all the auras at the edge were sucked in. The pitch-black crack seemed to contain a great terror and danger. Chu Mu only took one look, and he felt a chill. Clenching his teeth, he had no choice but to take the risk. Without stopping, he charged into the pitch-black crack. The crack was also rapidly closing. The experts chasing after him were enraged. They attacked again, and purple flames bombarded over. With a boom, the pitch-black crack closed, and only a trace of purple entered. Damned otherworldly demon! The expert chasing after him was incomparably enraged. He released a terrifying purple flame, burning everything around him. It took him a while to calm down. Otherworldly demons will definitely die after entering the spatial crack. Indeed, even with his strength, if he rashly entered the spatial crack without proper preparation, he would most likely die. With a boom, the expert turned into a purple light and rapidly left. He headed towards the spatial tunnel, chasing after the other swordsman. This scene was constantly playing out in the other spatial tunnels. Many of the foreign races that entered the deep blue world from the outside world were also fleeing for their lives. Chapter 1308. The Deep Blue World was a complete and independent world. It had a vast territory and rich resources. It also had various natural or man-made secret realms and spiritual land. At this moment, inside a spiritual land, the peace was broken. The void seemed to have been cut by an invisible sharp blade, silently splitting open. The darkness emitted a shocking chill, as if it could devour everything and turn everything into nothingness. If the dark crack expanded, it was very likely that it would destroy this spiritual land. Fortunately, the dark crack was only a meter long, so it was unable to pose a threat to the spiritual land. The dark crack was like the mouth of a giant beast that had eaten something unpleasant. It fiercely spat forward, and a black shadow was spat out, falling like a meteorite. With a bang, the black shadow smashed a hole in the ground of the spiritual land, and it was embedded in the hole. The dark crack quickly closed, leaving behind only a terrifying spatial energy fluctuation that did not dissipate for a long time. That black shadow was like a lump of charcoal, silent and unmoving. After a long time passed. The black shadow moved a little, and the black color on its body peeled off. His body, which was brimming with life force, constantly healed itself. The origin of wood in his heart constantly radiated powerful life force, replenishing the life force that his body had consumed, allowing his severely damaged body to rapidly recover. This black shadow was Chu Mu, who had been forced to escape into the spatial crack after a narrow escape. He was being chased by the indigenous experts of the deep blue world. He had used the last of the heavenly desolation sword chi to block the powerful attack of the expert who was chasing him. He knew that it would be difficult to escape, so he broke through the void and escaped into the crack. Although he knew that it was full of danger, there was always a glimmer of hope. Speaking of which, other than the last of the heavenly desolation sword chi, Chu Mu also had some other trump cards. They were the life-saving trump cards that the Heavenly Sword Hall had given him before he set off. Its function was more for defense. Hundreds of thousands of Nirvana Realm swordsmen, it could be said that each of them had their own life-saving trump cards. The difference was in how strong they were. As one of the shensis of the Heavenly Sword Hall, the Heavenly Sword Hall would naturally give Chu Mu a life-saving trump card. However, these life-saving trump cards all had a limit, just like the infinite desolation sword chi. The one chasing after Chu Mu was a low-level martial saint expert, who was able to offset the power of the heavenly wasteland sword chi with one strike. Even if Chu Mu used other life-saving trump cards, he would only be able to buy some time, and would eventually be caught up. This was why Chu Mu risked his life and entered the crack in space. The native powerhouse who was chasing after him knew that if he didn't make sufficient preparations, he would most likely die even if he entered the space crack, let alone an otherworldly demon whose strength was far inferior to his. However, he hadn't expected that Chu Mu would have so many life-saving cards. It was these life-saving cards that had allowed Chu Mu to survive the turbulent flow of the space crack, but at the cost of being severely injured. It had to be said that the turbulent flow of the space crack was too terrifying. Compared to the power of the rules of space at the later stage of the subtle realm, it was like comparing a firefly to the bright moon. They were not on the same level at all. After using up all his life-saving trump cards, the treasured robe and inner armor on his body were all shattered, but his strong body resisted the turbulent flow of the space crack. The origin of the wood aspect and the vitality contained in his body also played a great role. It was precisely because of this that Chu Mu was able to withstand the terrifying power of the turbulent flow of the space crack. His severely injured body rapidly healed itself. Fortunately, during the Supreme Seat Challenge, when Chu Mu broke through to the second sky of Nirvana realm, there was a strange phenomenon of starlight tide, which caused his flesh and blood to be filled with vitality. When he broke through to the third sky of Nirvana realm, the vitality contained in his flesh and blood was further enhanced, causing Chu Mu's body to have an amazing self-healing ability. With his amazing self-healing ability and the vitality of the wood aspect, Chu Mu's injuries quickly healed. His whole body moved, and the black spots on his body fell off, revealing his skin that was as fluorescent as snow, with a layer of brilliant light. Jumping out of the hole, Chu Mu let out a sigh of relief. Immediately, when he was about to take out his clothes and put them on, he found that his space ring was gone. Back to the beginning in one night. Chu Mu was startled at first, then said with a wry smile. Even though Chu Mu was helpless, he had no other choice. The turbulent flow of the space crack was too terrifying. It was good enough that he could keep his life. As for the space ring, it was most likely destroyed by the turbulent flow. Everything in the space ring had been crushed by the turbulent flow and turned into nothingness. Thinking of this, Chu Mu was shocked. He quickly sensed the portable space. After carefully sensing, he finally got in touch with the portable space again. Everything inside was intact. The crystal coffin was still in the portable space. Unfortunately, Chu Mu had stored a large number of raw core ores and elixirs in the space ring. Now all of them were gone. The second level of the star calamity can be used to create a star armor with the power of the stars. Let's try it. Thinking to himself, Chu Mu stood still and tried to communicate with the power of the stars. However, he did not feel anything, as if he was isolated. Helpless, Chu Mu could only drive his physical strength and force out strands of starlight to temporarily construct a set of star armor to wear. He was not an exhibitionist. Cultivating the star calamity and absorbing the power of the stars would bring a part of it with him. This star armor was just a relatively ordinary piece of clothing. He could only wait until he could feel the power of the stars and then absorb it to strengthen it and become a treasure armor. The star armor was made up of energy, and it was unusually comfortable to wear. Calming down, Chu Mu carefully observed his surroundings, carefully feeling the fluctuations of the aura around him. The aura of the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth is so dense, but I can't feel any fluctuations of the power of the heavens and earth. His face was filled with surprise. His mind spun rapidly, and he preliminarily determined that this was a place similar to the 5 elements Sword Sect's 5 elements mystery realm. This was because Chu Mu still remembered that when he rushed out of the void passage, although he was chased and wanted to escape, he could still feel the various aura fluctuations in the air of the deep blue world. It was similar to the ancient god world, and definitely not just the 5 element. Therefore, Chu Mu speculated that he had rushed out of the space crack and entered a place similar to the 5 elements mystery realm. Taking a breath, he could clearly feel the fluctuations of the power of the 5 element. After sizing up, Chu Mu could clearly see where he was. There was a 5-colored barrier in the sky, and in the middle was a 3-story tower. There were 5 sides, and he could not find the entrance. On each side of the first floor, there was a small circular hole about the size of a fist. Each hole had a different color, and they were gold, green, blue, red, and brown. Could it be that they correspond to metal, wood, water, fire, and earth? Chu Mu guessed. Other than the 3-story tower in the middle, there were 5 small paths that led to 5 different places. Chu Mu did a quick check and realized that the aura fluctuations emitted from the 5 small paths were completely different, but they corresponded to the power of the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. This situation made Chu Mu even more curious. Logically speaking, I obtained the number 1 position on the Heaven Youth Leaderboard and received the blessing of the Heaven Youth Leaderboard. Although the effect is not as obvious as my own luck, it should still be of some help. The factor of having a slim chance of survival shouldn't be too big. Then, at this place, as if he had figured something out, Chu Mu's eyes suddenly lit up. His appearance here might be random, or it might be the blessing of the Heaven Youth Leaderboard's huge blessing. If it was the blessing of the Heaven Youth Leaderboard's huge blessing, this place would definitely be a treasure ground. Through observation, Chu Mu was 70% convinced. Could it be that there would be good fortune after surviving a great disaster? This place would be the starting point for him to integrate into the deep blue world. After thinking about it, Chu Mu chose one of the small paths and walked over. He wanted to further confirm and find a way to leave this place. At the edge of the small path, there wasn't a single blade of grass. Pieces of rocks were pointed to the sky like swords, emitting a sharp aura that was extremely shocking. The further he walked, the more he could feel the sharp aura filling the air, as if it had replaced the air. The small path wasn't long, only a few thousand meters long. At the end of the small path, there was a golden land. The rocks were golden and the mountain walls were golden as well. Under the mountain wall, there was a golden figure standing. That golden figure wasn't human, nor was it from any race that Chu Mu had seen before. Its entire body was made of metal, as if it was a puppet made of metal. Its appearance was somewhat similar to a praying mantis, but its arms were swords instead of scimitars. Its entire body emitted a shocking aura of sharpness, as if any part of its body could cut through anything. Chu Mu's arrival seemed to have awakened the other party. It opened its eyes and a golden aura shot out, causing Chu Mu to feel a piercing pain in his eyes. His expression couldn't help but turn solemn. Gently holding the heaven-slashing sword in his hand, Chu Mu squinted his eyes and stared at the other party. His mind spun rapidly, and he finally confirmed that this fellow must be a special spiritual beast of the metal elemental treasured land of the 5 elemental treasured land. For the time being, he would call it the metal elemental spiritual beast. The metal elemental spiritual beast's body emitted a cold aura. It moved and instantly turned into a golden light. Like a golden lightning bolt, it swept towards Chu Mu. The two swords drew a straight line in the air, as if it was going to cut the space apart. Simple, violent, and direct. There wasn't the slightest bit of fanciness. The killing intent was awe-inspiring, as if it was born to kill. Facing a fatal blow, Chu Mu inexplicably became excited. It was the excitement of encountering a powerful opponent, causing his blood to boil. The heaven-slashing sword was raised and a melodious sword cry rang out. Sword light shone brightly as it slashed out. The metal elemental spiritual beast was a powerful opponent, so Chu Mu had to take it seriously. Chu Mu discovered that in this place, other than the 5 elemental spiritual beast, the other 4 elemental spiritual beasts were suppressed. They couldn't display much strength. Moreover, in this place, other than the metal elemental spiritual beast, the other 4 elemental spiritual beasts were also suppressed. In other words, Chu Mu could only use the metal elemental power of the 5 elements to fight against metal elemental spirit beast. Using the metal elemental spiritual beast, using metal against metal, using sword skills to fight. It was as if this was a test of the challenger's attainment in the metal elemental spiritual beast. Chu Mu had never been afraid of a challenge. An intense battle began, but no one else knew about it. At this time, in the outside world, a storm was set off to find and kill the outer space demon. Chapter 1309. The Deep Blue World was an independent and complete world. Once the world's protective barrier was broken, outsiders would enter. No matter what their goal was, in the eyes of the native experts of the Deep Blue World, they were invaders. Therefore, they were all labeled as extraterrestrial demons. 100 races, including the human race, opened up 100 void passageways. There were some in front and some in the back. There were also more and fewer people. There were those with more people like the underworld god race, which had close to 1 million people. There were those with fewer people, which was the lowest ranked race, which only had tens of thousands of people. However, it was hard to say the conditions to obtain the recognition of the world spirit. Theoretically, anyone could do it. Unfortunately, the races that were slower to open up the void passageways were attacked by the native experts of the deep blue world. The void passageways collapsed and tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of geniuses were buried in the void passageways. They were deader than dead. Some of the foreign races that were lucky enough to enter the deep blue world through the void passageways were also hunted down by the native experts of the deep blue world. Almost all of them were wiped out. In short, the races that opened up the void passageways first had the advantage because the native experts of the deep blue world only reacted at that time and took corresponding measures. Nirvana realm experts weren't strong enough. If it was a sacred rank expert, not only would they be able to pass through the void passageways safely, they would also be able to fight with the native experts of the deep blue world. They would form an alliance and be able to take root in the deep blue world. Step by step, they would be able to occupy the deep blue world. This time, a portion of the hundreds of thousands of human swordsmen died in the void passageways. A portion of them died under the pursuit of the native experts of the deep blue world. The other races also suffered significant losses. The deep blue world's experts jointly issued the evil demon hunting order. Hunting down the extraterrestrial demons would result in rewards. However, Chu-Mu didn't know about any of this. The metal law can be used like this. The intense battle with the metal elemental spirit beast broadened Chu-Mu's horizons. He realized that the application of the metal law could be more meticulous and flexible. Simply put, the battle techniques displayed by the metal elemental spirit beast couldn't be compared to Chu-Mu. However, its application of the metal law was more exquisite than Chu-Mu's. It was worth learning from Chu-Mu. Fighting with the metal elemental spirit beast was also a cultivation of the metal law. Thank you, but you still have to die. As soon as he finished speaking, the sky/sword slashed out. The sword light transformed into a strand of golden light that flashed through the sky like a bolt of lightning. It was incomparably fast and extremely sharp. It sliced open space and left behind a golden streak as it pierced through the head of the metal element spirit beast. With a flick of his wrist, swoosh, 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 the golden sword light slashed madly, incomparably sharp. The bodies of the metal element spirit beasts were cut into pieces by the countless sword light and fell to the ground. Suddenly, a golden light shone brightly. It turned out that the inside of the metal element spiritual beast's disintegrated body was shining with golden light. It was a golden bead the size of a fist. Golden light was constantly being emitted from the golden bead. Chu-Mu stretched out his hand and grabbed the golden bead. He could feel the sharpness contained within it. It was the fluctuation of the pure power of metal. Golden Spirit Pearl. This was the name of the golden bead in Chu-Mu's hand. Keeping the golden spirit pearl in his portable mini-space, Chu-Mu looked around. He did not find anything else and turned to leave. The Jupiter spirit beast in the wood elemental land was actually a 5-meter-tall tree that grew in the midst of thousands of grasses. It was full of vitality and verdant. From its appearance, it was absolutely impossible to imagine that it was a wood elemental spirit beast. In the wood elemental land, only the power of wood could be used. Other powers would be suppressed and greatly weakened. The green sword light shot out with a sense of endless vitality. It was connected in the air. The wood elemental spirit beast waved dozens of branches like dozens of swords. They were either soft, tough, or rigid. They attacked Chu-Mu from different angles. The edges of the branches were sharp and could cut through everything. The tips were sharp and could pierce through everything. Dozens of branches attacked at the same time without stopping. They contained the endless power of wood, causing every move and style to wrap around Chu-Mu's body. The shock waves had yet to dissipate, wave after wave followed by wave after wave. The wood elemental spirit beast's use of the power of wood was not inferior to the metal elemental spirit beast's use of the power of metal. Moreover, its fighting skills were more flexible and varied than the metal elemental spirit beast's direct killing. Chu Mu was willing to endure such a battle. A suitable opponent was a better stepping stone. Whether it was the metal elemental spirit beast or the wood elemental spirit beast, to other third heavenly layer Nirvana realm swordsmen, they were tyrannical existences that could not be defeated. However, to Chu Mu, they were just strong opponents, not invincible. He learned the use of the power of metal from the metal elemental spirit beast, and learned the use of the power of wood from the wood elemental spirit beast. He fought with his sword. With a single strike, the endless sword light shot out, cutting off branches one after another, and attacked the wood elemental spirit beast. This sword light contained the essence of the law of wood and the essence of Chu Mu's swordsmanship. It was a killing move. Unable to resist, the wood elemental spirit beast was penetrated by the sword. The terrifying power twisted and destroyed the wood elemental spirit beast's body. Its vitality rapidly faded away. In the end, only a wood elemental orb was left. Metal elemental orb, wood elemental orb. The remaining ones should be the water elemental orb, fire elemental orb, and earth elemental orb. Chu Mu grasped the wood elemental orb in his hand, and felt the pure vitality contained in the wood elemental spirit orb. The wood aspect origin in his heart suddenly throbbed, as if it wanted to absorb the energy contained in the wood elemental orb. Chu Mu hurriedly put the wood elemental orb into his pocket space. If it was useless, he would not be stingy. However, Chu Mu thought that this wood elemental orb was related to the opening of the 3-story pagoda. It must be used. Turning around, he left the wood elemental land and headed towards the water elemental land. Half of the water elemental land was land, while the other half was a half-meter deep lake. The lake was so clear that one could see the bottom. There were many large and small pebbles scattered around, and one could vaguely see the water plants swaying in the water. At the end of the lake, there was a small waterfall. The water seemed to fall from the void. When Chu Mu arrived, the lake water under the small waterfall flowed backwards and gathered together. A figure seemed to drill out from the bottom of the lake and condensed. It was a 3-meter-tall water giant. The water giant did not have legs. It only had a body, a head, and 2 arms. The water giant was a water elemental spirit beast. Its entire body was blue, and water constantly flowed from its body. The water elemental spirit beast launched an attack. Its 2 arms stretched out and water arrows instantly condensed. They pierced through the air and shot out with astonishing power. Chu Mu felt a cold chill, as if it wanted to freeze him. Shifting his feet, he dodged the water arrows and slashed out with the sky-beheading sword. A blue sword light rippled through the water as it attacked the water elemental spirit beast. The water elemental spirit beast was most proficient in the use of the power of water. This was what Chu Mu wanted to learn. However, the water elemental spirit beast's fighting style was not close combat. Instead, it constantly released water arrows from a distance, attacking Chu Mu from all angles. Every water arrow was extremely sharp and cold. Once hit, one's blood would freeze and their muscles would stiffen. In order to directly experience the water elemental spirit beast's use of the power of water, Chu Mu used the sky-beheading sword to shatter the water arrows. This way, his comprehension would be more direct and profound. Every time the water arrow was shattered, there would be a cold energy flowing through the sword and into Chu Mu's palm, causing his palm to feel cold. Chu Mu circulated the divine desolate sword essence to disperse the cold energy. The water arrows could not do anything to Chu Mu. Suddenly, the water elemental spirit beast raised its arms. The small waterfall behind it surged and turned into a torrential flood. It was like a 100-meter-tall wave that wanted to destroy everything. It mercilessly wreaked havoc as it roared towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu's expression changed. The power of the roaring flood was too shocking. He raised the sky beheading sword. A blue sword light shone brightly. With a low roar, he slashed down. The sword light turned into a blue ray and violently slashed out. It was like a long whip with astonishing power. With a pause sound, the long whip was shattered. The flood was split open from the middle and crashed down. Chu Mu immediately passed through the gap in the flood and leaped into the air. He attacked the water elemental spirit beast with the sky beheading sword. The power of water was continuous and unbreakable. But when the power of water was condensed, it still had a terrifying cutting power. Gradually understanding, Chu Mu's sword had a continuous attack. It was incomparably flexible and condensed into a line. Its cutting power was shockingly tyrannical. Under Chu Mu's attacks, the water elemental spirit beast was constantly injured. In the end, it was killed and turned into water that filled the sky. A fist-sized water spirit pearl emitted a clear blue light. The gold spirit pearl, wood spirit pearl and water spirit pearl were in his hands. All that was left was the fire spirit pearl and earth spirit pearl. The fire spirit pearl was to kill the fire elemental spirit beast, while the earth spirit pearl was to kill the earth elemental spirit beast. Chu Mu left the water elemental land and arrived at the fire elemental land. The fire elemental land was a magma land. It was a blazing red that was dazzling to the eye. It made people feel hot. The fire elemental spirit beast was somewhat similar to the water elemental spirit beast. It was a fire giant that appeared in the magma. It could also be called a magma giant. Its entire body was scarlet and bright. It flowed down, emitting an incomparably high temperature as if it could melt everything. The fire elemental spirit beast immediately launched an attack. It opened its eyes and shot out two scarlet rays of light that penetrated everything. It shot towards Chu Mu as if it was burned to ashes. Chu Mu's expression changed greatly and he quickly dodged. The ground behind him was hit by the laser, and two scorched marks were immediately cut open, emitting a burnt smell. He displayed the power of the law of fire and integrated it into the sky beheading sword. He resisted the high temperature and attacked the fire elemental spirit beast. To some extent, the fire elemental spirit beast was more difficult to deal with than the water elemental spirit beast. Chu Mu had to be more careful. In the battle, he constantly improved the application of the power of the law of fire and went straight to the essence. After a difficult battle, the fiery red sword light seemed to be able to trigger the power of the magma. The horrifying high temperature burned violently and killed the fire element spirit beast, obtaining the fourth spirit pearl, the fire spirit pearl. After receiving the fire spirit pearl, Chu Mu turned and left. He went to the earth elemental land and prepared to deal with the last spirit beast. The earth elemental spirit beast in the earth elemental land was a stone giant made of rock. It was 10 meters tall. Its huge fist seemed to be able to smash mountains and shatter the earth. It gave Chu Mu a huge pressure. Chapter 13:10. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, the 5 elements, with earth as the core and bearing. The earth element spirit beast was also the most difficult of the 5 elements spirit beasts to deal with. Its body was made of rock and was extremely tough and difficult to destroy. In close combat, every strike was heavy and powerful, as if it could shatter the earth. In order to directly feel the earth elemental spirit beast's usage of the power of earth, Chu Mu used the sword in his hand to clash with the earth elemental spirit beast. Every time they clashed, a huge force would rush over, shaking his body and causing his blood to boil. The earth elemental spirit beast was like a peerless body cultivation expert. After each clash, Chu Mu gradually grasped the use of the power of earth. Speaking of which, Chu Mu's power of the 5 elements had all reached the early subtle level, surpassing many of his peers. But in terms of the use of the power of the 5 elements, he was still at a relatively shallow level. First, he lacked guidance, and second, he lacked time. Now was the perfect opportunity. If it were another swordsman whose perception was not as good as Chu Mu's, they might not have been able to gain anything. The use of the power of earth was constantly grasped by Chu Mu. Every strike carried a brown light, gradually becoming heavy and steady. Every strike seemed to cause the earth to shake. His tyrannical physical strength, under the application of the rules of earth, had reached the pinnacle. Leaping up, he raised the sky-beheading sword. A brown light bloomed, as if it was bearing the weight of the earth, and heavily slashed down. There was no gorgeous technique, just a single slash, containing the terrifying power of the earth. Under this sword, the earth element spirit beast was forcibly split apart. The earth element spirit bead was in his hand. Letting out a sigh of relief, Chu Mu rested for a moment, then turned and left the earth element field, returning to the front of the 3-story tower. Circling around the tower, Chu Mu inlaid the 5 spirit beads one by one. After the 5 spirit beads were completely inlaid, they suddenly emitted a bright light. The 3-story tower trembled, and a 5-colored light emitted from the 5 spirit beads, rapidly spreading out and covering the entire tower. The 5 colors in the air became increasingly resplendent, and the power of the 5 elements directly rose by several levels, causing Chu Mu's mind to shake. Immediately after, the 5-colored light of the 3-story tower shrunk from the top floor to the bottom floor, finally condensing at the first floor. The 5-colored light was extremely dazzling. Chu Mu felt like he was being summoned. It was as if there was a voice calling out to him. Walk over, walk over. Not feeling any danger, Chu Mu took large strides forward. Everything he did, wasn't it all to enter the 3rd floor of the tower? Now that the opportunity was right in front of him, he couldn't miss it. When Zhang Xian's body came into contact with the 5-colored light, he was not obstructed at all. He easily entered it and disappeared. Colorful lights swirled in front of his eyes. After they disappeared, Chu Mu appeared on the 1st floor of the 3-story tower. The rectangular room had 5 corners, and each corner had a ball of light. The balls of light were about the size of a person, and they were of different colors: gold, green, blue, red, and brown. They emitted energy waves of sharpness, vitality, gentleness, heat, and heaviness. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Other than the 5 balls of light, there was nothing else. Chu Mu looked around. With some doubts, he walked towards one of the balls of light. It was a golden ball of light. This was Chu Mu's subconscious choice. The closer he got to the golden ball of light, the more he could feel the sharpness of it. As he approached, he stretched out his left hand to touch the golden ball of light. The moment he came into contact with it, the golden ball of light suddenly burst out with a shocking light. The sharpness was intense, and a vast and unstoppable force erupted. It directly wrapped around Chu Mu and sucked him into the golden ball of light. A figure appeared in the golden ball of light that was as tall as a person. Before he could struggle, streams of information surged like a raging tide, rushing endlessly into Chu Mu's mind. With Chu Mu's knowledge, when he first read the first sentence, he felt the subtlety of it. He simply did not struggle and allowed the information to rush into his mind, carefully reading, comprehending, and absorbing it. As time passed, the golden ball of light became fainter and fainter, as if its power was constantly being consumed. When the golden ball of light completely disappeared, the transmission of the information was also completed. Chu Mu stood on the spot without moving. His eyes were closed, and the aura on his body became very weak. Time passed slowly. Suddenly, Chu Mu opened his eyes. His pupils were pure gold, emitting an incomparably shocking sharpness. It pierced through the void, leaving 2 golden traces in the air. The weak aura on his body became stronger in an instant, like a divine sword being unsheathed. It was earth-shattering. The information that he had just received was the inheritance of metal. This inheritance allowed Chu Mu's understanding of the power of metal to deepen by a lot. His application of the power of metal had also deepened. Vaguely, the power of the laws of metal showed signs of breaking through to the intermediate stage of the subtle stage. The golden light in his eyes receded, and his pupils returned to normal. The sharpness on his body was also receding. Chu-Mu stretched out his left hand and opened his palm. Golden light flickered in the center of his palm, condensing and spreading. The outline of a golden sword appeared, slowly drilling out from his palm and spinning. The outline of the golden sword emitted a shocking sharpness. In the past, Chu-Mu would never be able to do this. This was a deeper application of the power of metal. However, after receiving the inheritance of metal, his understanding of the mysteries of the power of metal had deepened. His application of the power of the laws of metal had also deepened. His palm trembled, and the rotating golden sword on his palm suddenly exploded, turning into strands of golden sword chi that shot out. The sword chi was like silk, cutting through everything, as if it was splitting the void. This attack was purely the application of the power of the laws of metal, but it was so sharp that even Chu-Mu himself was surprised. However, he had only grasped the basics of the inheritance of metal. There was still room for improvement. Taking a deep breath, a touch of gold spread out from his body, covering the first layer. The faint golden light filled the air, causing the other 4 balls of light to flicker, as if they had dimmed a little. Metal force field. Apart from the deeper application of the power of metal, the golden balls of light also contained the cultivation method of the metal force field. The 5 elements sword sect focused on the sword, and the power of the 5 elements was secondary. There were various applications of the power of the 5 elements, and naturally, there were 5 force fields related to the 5 elements. However, Chu-Mu rarely stayed in the 5 elements sword sect. Therefore, he did not receive any related inheritance. He did not expect to receive such an inheritance in an unfamiliar world. Putting away the metal force field, he exhaled. He did not deepen his cultivation for the time being. Instead, he walked towards the other balls of light, preparing to receive other inheritances. Approaching the green ball of light, Chu-Mu reached out his hand and was absorbed by the green ball of light. This time, he did not struggle at all. He wholeheartedly read the information that flooded into his mind. The cultivation method of the wood force field, the deeper application of the power of wood. Chu-Mu's comprehension ability was extremely powerful. As for the metal force field and wood force field, they were merely the lowest level of force field. To others, they would need to spend a bit of time to cultivate before they could grasp them. However, to Chu-Mu, the moment he obtained them, he comprehended them. Moreover, he had the power of the world at the peak of the initial stage of the subtle realm. He had an even deeper level of application, so he quickly cultivated the wood force field and reached the entry level. The green ball of light disappeared. After a while, Chu-Mu opened his eyes. His pupils were green, and an endless vitality spread out from his body. The wood origin had also received great benefit. Chu-Mu also felt that his body had been baptized, becoming more energetic. Opening his palm, a green aura spread out from the center of his palm. An illusory seedling drilled out from his palm and grew. Although it was thin and illusory, it emitted a vigorous vitality. With a flip of his palm, the seedling disappeared, and a faint green light spread out from Chu-Mu's body. Wood force field. Without stopping, he walked toward the blue ball of light. Accepting the power of water. After a while, Chu-Mu's application of the power of water deepened. One could tell just by looking at the miniature river in his palm. Soon after, he released a faint blue force field. It was the water force field. After accepting the power of water, Chu-Mu walked toward the red ball of light and entered it to accept the power of fire. After that, he learned the application of the power of fire, which was called the 7 profound fire art. Then, he cultivated the fire force field to the entry level. Finally, he walked into the brown ball of light to accept the power of earth and the 7 profound earth art. He also learned the cultivation method of earth force field to the entry level. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The power of the 5 elements, the 7 profound art, and each force field. Chumu had received all of them. In fact, the five spirits' secret realm had existed for a long time. It could be traced back to before the deep blue world was reorganized. It was a place of 5 elements, and there was a 5 spirits' secret realm. Those who were lucky enough to enter could receive the inheritance. This inheritance was not limited to one person. It could be 1, 2, 3, or even 4 people. However, it could only be 5 people at most. If there were 5 people, each of them would be proficient in one of the 5 elements. They would have to kill a 5-elemental spiritual beast and obtain one of its spiritual bead. Then, they would have to open the 5 spirits' secret realm to receive the corresponding inheritance. What the 5 of them had done was done by Chumu alone. He alone received the inheritance of the power of 5 elements. After receiving the power of earth, Chumu also received a piece of information. This information was about the conditions to enter the second level of the 5 spirits' secret realm. The condition to enter the second level of the 5 spirits' secret realm was to cultivate all 5 of the 7 profound arts to perfection. Then, they would be able to enter the second level of the 5 spirits' secret realm. At this moment, there was a 5-colored light on the first level of the 5 spirits' secret realm. It condensed in the center and turned into a 5-colored token. It flew toward Chumu and merged into Chumu's body. This was the 5 spirits' secret realm. With the 5-spirit order, Chumu could freely enter and exit the 5-spirit pagoda. It could be said that with the 5-spirit order, the 5-spirit pagoda would become his backyard. He could enter and exit as he pleased. Since this was the case, Chumu was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he stayed on the first level of the 5 spirits' secret realm and began to cultivate the 5 elemental 7 profound art. He wanted to improve his understanding and application of the power of 5 elements. Chapter 13:11. In the deep blue world, the moon was shadowless and the stars were resplendent. They hung in the sky one by one, blinking as if they were countless curious eyes. Under the starry sky, a figure stood on the ground in the middle of the night. He raised his head to look at the vast starry sky with a distant gaze. "Where do the stars of the deep blue world come from?" A leisurely voice rang out, carrying some doubt. Chumu had seen the deep blue world from the outside with his own eyes. It was a world protected by a deep blue light. Then, were the stars that Chumu was looking at stars from the deep blue world, or were they the light of life planets outside the deep blue world? With Chumu's current ability, he was still unable to find out. Back when he entered the deep blue world through the void tunnel, he was immediately hunted down, so he didn't have the time to look. Suppressing the doubts in his heart, Chumu stared at the stars in the sky and took a deep breath. He cleared his mind of distracting thoughts and circulated the second layer of the astral calamity cultivation method, astral clothe. In an instant, the stars in the sky shone brightly. Their light immediately overshadowed the other stars. As they flickered, strands of starlight rapidly descended. The starlight landed on Chumu's body and dispersed. Strands of starlight revolved around Chumu's astral clothes and were absorbed by them. The astral clothes also constantly improved under the refinement of the starlight, becoming a treasure garment. The astral clothes cultivation method was a small cultivation method that came with the astral calamity cultivation method. It didn't have much destructive power, but it was very practical. At the very least, it could condense astral clothes or even astral clothe. The astral clothes could only cover the body. Its defensive power was weak, but it was the foundation of cultivating astral clothes. The strength of astral clothes was related to refinement. The more refinement, the stronger it would be. For the entire night, Chumu absorbed the starlight and refined the astral clothes, constantly improving them. The night passed and the day arrived. The stars disappeared. Chumu stopped cultivating astral clothes. After a night of tempering, the starlight cloak on his body was close to the level of starlight cloak. It possessed a certain degree of defensive power. However, if he wanted to truly possess a tyrannical defensive power, he still needed more tempering. It wasn't something that could be achieved overnight. The most important thing now wasn't the star treasure robe, but to understand the deep blue world. This was an unknown world. They had to understand it, and they had to understand it deeply. Only then would they be able to complete their mission. No matter what race it was, there was only one goal for entering the deep blue world. That was to open the defenses of the deep blue world and let the experts of their race enter. There was only one way to break through the defense, and that was to obtain the approval of the spirit of the deep blue world. He only needed a preliminary approval, but before that, he had to find the location of the spirit of the deep blue world. Every living world had a world spirit, but the location of the world spirit was very mysterious. It could even be said that even the native powerhouses of the deep blue world might not know where the world spirit was. It wasn't easy to complete this mission. Chumu didn't know how much time he would need. He didn't know if he could complete it or if the others could. He could only try his best. In the first level of the Penta Pagoda in the Penta Spirit Mystery Realm, Chumu cultivated the 5 Elemental 7 Profound technique until he reached a bottleneck. Only then did he use the 5 Elemental order to leave the Penta Spirit Mystery Realm. He had only cultivated the 7 Profound technique to the 4th Profound. There was still a gap from the 7th Profound to perfection. However, the 4th Profound allowed Chumu's understanding and application of the 5 elemental power to reach an unimaginable level. His refinement of the 5 elemental power had also reached the intermediate stage of the subtle realm. Chumu dared to conclude that among the 4 major star fields of the deep blue world, the 5 elemental power of law was at the intermediate stage of the subtle realm. In terms of application of the 5 elemental power of law, no one could compare with him. At this moment, his application of the 5 elemental power was above the spatial power of law. This was a huge gain. As for the 5 elemental force fields, they could be considered as a kind of supplementary force field. Compared to the void-shattering force field, the 5 elemental force fields couldn't be compared at all, unless the 5 elemental force fields were combined into one. If the first level of the 5 elemental pagoda had an inheritance like the 7 profound technique, then what about the second level? The condition to enter the second level was to cultivate the 5 elemental 7 profound technique to perfection of the 7th profound. Chumu couldn't help but be filled with anticipation. The place he appeared in seemed to be a very remote place. It was a barren mountain, and the yuan qi in the world was very weak. It could be said to be a very bad place. It was a remote and barren place with barren mountains and unruly rivers. However, so what? Chumu cared about the inheritance of the 5 elemental pagoda and not the outside of the secret realm. Moreover, he would leave this place very soon. As he walked, Chumu thought about where he should start from to truly integrate into the deep blue world. From there, he could understand the deep blue world and explore the location of the power of the world. Wei Yang, I advise you to turn back in time. Otherwise, what awaits you will be the endless pursuit of the Li family. They will not stop until you die. Her words were full of threats, but her voice sounded a little weak. Ha 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 ha, Miss Li, I have to say that you are still so cute. Even at this time, you still dare to threaten me. After Wei Yang laughed, his face was ferocious. His eyes flashed with a ruthless light. Do you think that I, Wei Yang, am scared? Not to mention the Li family, even if it was a force 10 times stronger than the Li family, I, Wei Yang, am not afraid. Because as long as I have you, I will be reborn. My talent and strength will increase by leaps and bounds. At that time, I will be able to enter a powerful sect and become an important disciple. Wei Yang, listen to me. My Li family has some connections with the Skyblaze sect. We can recommend some people to become disciples of the Skyblaze sect. If you let me go, I promise that not only will I not take revenge on you, but I will also give you a spot to become a disciple of the Skyblaze sect. Li Churan said in a panic. She looked pitiful, but she did not know that this appearance looked even more tempting. It turned the ruthlessness in Wei Yang's eyes into a desire to conquer. "Don't treat me like a 3-year-old child. Just accept your fate. Miss Li, I will make you very happy. I guarantee that you will not forget it after tasting it. Who knows, you might even beg me for it." Wei Yang grinned and laughed lasciviously. He approached Li Churan step by step. He was now enjoying the process of a hungry wolf catching a little white rabbit. Seeing the little white rabbit trembling under his power, he felt a sense of accomplishment. Li Churan's face was full of sadness. She never thought that a person who she trusted like an elegant young master would treat her like this. First, he ambushed and killed her guard, then tried to defile her. Fortunately, another guard risked his life to protect her and let her escape. She thought that she could successfully escape. As long as she escaped back to the Li family, with the Li family's power, crushing Wei Yang would be like crushing an ant. This place was a remote and desolate mountain range. Usually, no one would come here. Even if someone came here, their strength would most likely not be very good. After all, the cultivation environment here was very harsh. It was most likely a disaster. As she thought about it, Li Churan's expression suddenly changed. If she was defiled by Wei Yang, then the Li family would most likely suffer a calamity. That person would definitely not let the Li family off. Her face turned pale and her entire body trembled. Wei Yang thought that she was afraid of him and became even more proud. In Wei Yang's opinion, Li Churan was already in the bag. In such a place, there would not be any accident. However, an accident happened. A figure appeared and slowly walked over from afar. Li Churan seemed to have grabbed onto a life-saving straw, while Wei Yang's handsome face was filled with a fierce light. He raised his left hand, and his 5 fingers moved quickly, outlining in the void. At the same time, his lips trembled a few times, as if he was chanting something. A violent aura fluctuation appeared in the air. "Be careful of the heart fire technique." Li Churan's expression changed drastically as she hurriedly shouted at Chu Mu. Chu Mu was very surprised. As he walked, he was thinking about how to cut into the deep blue world. He did not expect to encounter such a scene and be directly attacked without saying a word. The outline of the other party's left hand caused a violent aura fluctuation of the power of fire in the air. Chu Mu's eyes immediately lit up. This was the first time he had seen a cultivator from the deep blue world make a move. Previously, he had been focused on escaping and had no time to pay attention to it. A flame appeared and condensed into the shape of an arrow. Wei Yang pointed forward with one hand at Chu Mu. With a whoosh, a fire arrow shot out, burning the air. In Wei Yang's opinion, this attack was enough to kill the other party. After all, the aura emitted by the other party was not strong at all. If it was a powerhouse, most of them would not use their feet to travel. The hope in Li Churan's eyes was quickly extinguished. It seems to be an application of a fire technique. Looking at the fire arrow flying over, Chu Mu thought to himself. In the blink of an eye, the fire arrow shot over. Just as it was about to hit Chu Mu flicked his finger. With a pop, under an invisible force, the fire arrow shattered and turned into sparks that splashed out. This scene stunned Wei Yang. He could not react in time. It also gave Li Churan a glimmer of hope, and her eyes lit up again. "You actually broke my fire arrow technique so easily. It seems that you have some skills. Unfortunately, if I met you elsewhere, I might have played with you. But now, you will die." Wei Yang laughed sinisterly. His eyes were crimson red. He held the sword in his right hand and slashed out. The fiery red sword light burned everything like a raging fire that spread and blasted towards Chu Mu. Immediately after, the 5 fingers of Wei Yang's left hand quickly flicked, constantly sketching. Traces appeared under his fingers, and violent fluctuations of the power of fire appeared. Strands of red aura appeared around Wei Yang's body. The red aura continued to spread from all directions, gathering in front of Wei Yang and condensing into a long flame spear. The power it emitted was more than 10 times stronger than the fire arrow from before. Moreover, the flame spear was even spinning. "It is your honor to die under my flame spear." Wei Yang laughed sinisterly. He waved his left hand forward as if he was pushing something. Suddenly, the spinning flame spear shot out. Chapter 13:12. The flaming sword Qi that was like a torrent flew through the air, and the rotating flaming spear followed closely behind. It broke through the flaming sword Qi and shot towards Chu Mu. Wei Yang had used all his strength in this attack. Seeing that Chu Mu did not move at all, as if he was scared silly, the last glimmer of hope in Li Qiuran's heart was completely wiped out. Wei Yang's handsome face was filled with a sinister smile. It was as if he had seen Chu Mu being pierced through by his flaming spear and turned into ashes. Just as the torrent of flaming sword Qi blasted towards Chu Mu and the flaming spear was about to hit Chu Mu stretched out another finger and poked forward. In an instant, Wei Yang thought that he was hallucinating. He vaguely saw a divine sword being unsheathed. It had an indescribable sharpness. The sword finger pierced towards the flaming spear and collided with the tip of the spear. The flaming spear suddenly stopped and shattered under Chu Mu's sword finger. The torrent of flaming sword Qi rushed past Chu Mu's left and right sides, as if it was intentionally avoiding him. This scene caused Wei Yang's eyes to widen in disbelief. How could such a powerful attack be so easily dispelled? Was it an illusion? Immediately after, Chu Mu's finger trembled, and a wisp of divine wilderness sword energy turned into sword Qi and shot out. Wei Yang only caught a glimpse of a golden light cutting through the sky, and then, his vision turned black, as if the world had turned upside down. His glabella was pierced through, and a wisp of dark red slowly flowed out. He fell backwards, and his brain was shattered by the sword Qi. His soul was scattered, and he couldn't be any more dead. Li Qiuran seemed to have been immobilized. She didn't move at all. She was dumbfounded. The changes were too fast. There were several twists and turns, causing Li Qiuran's emotions to rise and fall between hope and despair. Now that she saw Wei Yang killed in an instant, Li Qiuran was stunned. However, she was still the young miss of a family. She had an extraordinary background and some knowledge, so she quickly reacted. "Thank you for saving me." Li Qiuran bowed to Chu Mu. "It's nothing." Chu Mu smiled slightly and said casually. His goal was not to save Li Qiuran. It could be said that it was an accident. However, killing Wei Yang was equivalent to saving Li Qiuran. Moreover, when Chu Mu saw this scene, he had the idea to use this as an entry point to start integrating into this world. With Wei Yang's death, Li Qiuran relaxed, but she did not dare to stay here for long. She wanted to return to her family, but she was not strong enough. She was worried that there would be danger on the way back, so she could not help but think. "Benefactor, you have saved my life. I have no way of repaying you. Why don't you come with me to the Li family? The Li family will definitely repay you," Li Qiuran said. Thus, one wanted to find someone to protect, while the other wanted to use this as an entry point to integrate into the deep blue world. Just like that, the two happily decided. Li Qiuran was actually quite nervous and even a bit afraid. She was worried that this person would be like Wei Yang, but he was alone and was not very strong. If he wanted to return to his family, there would be all sorts of dangers. Chu Mu did not have that kind of intention towards Li Qiuran, nor did he need any repayment from the Li family. Chu Mu's words and actions did not show any intention of getting close to her, nor did he deliberately alienate her. This attitude gradually made Li Qiuran feel at ease. Li Qiuran was curious as to why Chu Mu would appear in such a remote place. To be able to kill Wei Yang in an instant, it meant that Chu Mu was much stronger than Wei Yang. One had to know that Wei Yang had the cultivation of the first layer of the Nirvana realm. In that case, Chu Mu also had the cultivation of the Nirvana realm. In such a place, even the divine condensation realm was not suitable for cultivation, let alone the Nirvana realm. Of course, Chu Mu would not say that he came from the outside world. Instead, he casually made it up. He had some fortuitous encounters by chance and came here after he came out. Big Brother Chu's luck is deep. Li Churan immediately laughed when she heard this. With her bright eyes and white teeth, it was no wonder that Wei Yang would be tempted. As if she was curious about Chu Mu, Li Churan asked about Chu Mu's origins and so on. Chu Mu thought for a moment and said that he was the successor of a hidden sect. Not long after he left the mountain, he had a fortuitous encounter by chance. It was not very convincing, but Li Churan seemed to believe it. However, the deep blue world was vast, so it was not surprising that there were hidden sections. In addition, Chu Mu had displayed the tyrannical strength that instantly killed Wei Yang. It was not strange to say that he was the successor of a hidden sect. Li Churan's mind was clearly not on this and did not continue to ask. Otherwise, Chu Mu really did not know how to answer because he did not know anything about the deep blue world. From Li Churan's words, Chu Mu began to understand the deep blue world bit by bit. The land under his feet belonged to the Azure Water Empire, and the Azure Water Empire was a powerful empire in the deep blue world. From Li Churan's words, Chu Mu knew that the Azure Water Empire was established by the Azure Water Sage Emperor many years ago. What was the Sage Emperor? Li Churan did not say and Chu Mu did not ask. Although he was curious, he knew that he could not ask or he would easily give himself away. Yen Mountain was a place within the Azure Water Empire. The Li clan was the most prosperous clan in Yen Mountain. Chu Mu gradually understood that he had stayed in the Five Spirits' hidden domain for half a year. In other words, half a year had passed since he entered the deep blue world. Gradually, Chu Mu heard the news of the 100 clans entering the deep blue world. They were defined as Outer Heaven demons and issued an Outer Heaven demon hunting order. Moreover, it was jointly issued by the big shots of the deep blue world. Killing an Outer Heaven demon would give you a reward and so on. This reminded Chu Mu to be more vigilant. If his identity was exposed, he would be hunted down endlessly. Although he was stronger, it was still far from enough. As the most prosperous clan in Yen Mountain, with a history of 1,000 years, the Li clan's manor was huge. It looked simple on the outside, but was actually luxurious. 2 people stood at the gate with swords on their back. Their bodies were straight and their auras were sharp. But Chu Mu felt that they didn't look like swordsmen, or rather, they were not. Thinking back to Wei Yang's fire arrow revolving fire spear and other fire techniques, Chu Mu realized that Deep Blue World was not like the 4 great human star regions. Although there were humans here, the cultivation of cultivators and swordsmen seemed to be somewhat different, yet somewhat similar. For example, the 2 standing at the gate of the Li clan, their auras were in the divine condensation realm. Young miss, the 2 guards saw Li Churan and bowed. At the same time, they looked at Chu Mu with puzzled eyes. Li Churan nodded, with the demeanor of a young miss. She led Chu Mu into the Li clan's manor. She called a servant and arranged a place for Chu Mu to rest. Li Churan said she had to take care of some matters and left. In the guest room, Chu Mu casually picked up a book and flipped it open. The words in the book were similar to the words used by humans, with only a small difference. But he could understand the general meaning. Flipping through the book was equivalent to understanding the deep blue world. After a while, the door was pushed open and a young man walked in. "I'm Li Qiufeng. You must be Chu Mu. Thank you for saving my little sister," the young man said. The young man said to himself, "Saving your life is a great favor. I hope you won't refuse this small gift." His words sounded polite, but Chu Mu could hear the estrangement in them. Li Qiufeng threw a spatial ring over. Chu Mu took it and scanned it with his divine sense. The spatial ring wasn't big, but there were some high-grade origin pills inside. There were about 100,000 of them. Seeing familiar things like origin pills, Chu Mu was slightly relieved. It would be easier to integrate with familiar things in an unfamiliar world. Li Qiufeng thought that Chu Mu had accepted the reward, so he revealed a faint smile. Are you planning to stay in the Li family as a guest for a few days, or? Chu Mu could tell from his tone that this person didn't welcome him and wanted him to leave. Chu Mu's expression turned cold. He planned to use the Li family as a starting point to integrate into this world, but that didn't mean he could be humiliated at will. With a flick of his finger, the spatial ring flew towards Li Qiufeng. Chu Mu sneered. 1,000-year-old family's aura is too strong. I'm not used to it. Goodbye. His words were mocking the Li family for being arrogant and self-righteous. Li Qiufeng caught the spatial ring with a cold and angry expression. Have a safe trip, I won't see you out, Li Qiufeng said coldly. Chu Mu didn't pay attention to him and walked out of the room in large strides. He walked out of the Li family manor. No one stopped Chu Mu. Chu Mu walked out of the Li family manor unimpeded. After leaving the Li family manor, Chu Mu couldn't help feeling dispirited. For a moment, he didn't know where to go. Plans really couldn't keep up with changes. Brother, how could you be like this? No matter what, he saved me once. Without him, I would have already. Li Qiuran lost her temper. Little sister, I'm doing this for your own good. That person's background is unknown. Perhaps he's plotting something, said Li Qiufeng. If he was plotting something, would he have sent me back? Asked Li Qiuran. Little sister, you're still too young. You don't know how dangerous the world is. Perhaps his goal is our Li family. He wants something from us. After all, our Li family is 1,000-year-old family, said Li Qiufeng. But, Li Qiuran wanted to retort. All right, there's no but. If he really doesn't have any special motives for our Li family, then he shouldn't have left in a fit of anger after being tested by me. If he really doesn't have any motives, then he should have stayed. Li Qiuran couldn't refute Li Qiuran's words. Besides, you believed him when he told you he was the successor of a hidden sect. You believed him when he told you he had a fortuitous encounter. Perhaps he had a plan all along. Li Qiuran carefully thought about it, and she was somewhat shaken. All right, you've been frightened. Go back and have a good rest. Don't worry about anything else, said Li Qiufeng. After Li Qiuran left, he summoned a few of his trusted aides. Young master, we'll definitely handle this matter well. That's right. We'll definitely teach him a lesson he won't forget. Chapter 1313. Yen Mountain was a mountain, as well as a part of the Azure Water Dynasty. Everything within 1,000 miles belonged to Yen Mountain, and in Yen Mountain, the Li family was the most powerful. After Chu Mu left the Li family, he randomly chose a direction and walked in large strides. As he walked, he pondered what to do next. Originally, he planned to use the Li family as a starting point after saving Li Qiu. Who knew that the Li family would be so despicable? Even a clay figurine would have some anger, not to mention Chu Mu. With a change of plans, he had to think of a new starting point. Not long after Chu Mu left the Li family, more than a dozen people rushed out from the Li family. Each one had a clear goal, and their speed was fast as they chased after Chu Mu. Not long after, more than a dozen people caught up to Chu Mu. What's the matter? While thinking, Chu Mu glanced at the other party and asked indifferently, What's the matter? Sir, please come with us. Among the people who blocked Chu Mu, the leader's eyes flashed with a cold light as he stared at Chu Mu. This scene was seen by some passers-by not far away. Isn't that the Li family's people? Who is the one surrounded? How unlucky to provoke the Li family. Provoking the Li family is a disaster. Even if they don't die, they will lose a layer of skin. All kinds of whispers were heard clearly by Chu Mu. He could see that the Li family was still famous in this area. The dozen Li family's people showed a smug expression. No time. Since it was his first time here, Chu Mu didn't want to provoke trouble, especially when the other party was a 1,000-year-old family with deep roots and strength. He couldn't underestimate them. Otherwise, these few low-level nirvana and spirit condensation cultivators wouldn't be enough. That's not up to you. You stole our Li clan's treasure. You'd better come back with us obediently, return the treasure, and admit your mistake. Perhaps our young master will be merciful and let you go." The leader sneered, looking as if he had Chu Mu in his grasp. Chu Mu immediately understood. So it was Li Qiufeng's doing. It seemed that this person's heart was as small as a pinhole. Just because of a small matter from before, he wanted to deal with him. Moreover, he even wanted to use the name of treasure thief to ruin his reputation. Chu Mu couldn't help but reveal a cold smile. "If I don't go back with you, what will happen to me?" Chu Mu asked with a cold smile. "Break his limbs and carry him back." The other party also sneered. More than 10 people pulled out their swords one by one. The sword light shone brightly, emitting bursts of cold air. Their gazes fell on Chu Mu's body. Their gazes were extremely sharp, as if they wanted to pierce dozens of holes in Chu Mu's body. Each and every one of them had an unfriendly expression. "I'll give you one last choice. Obediently come back with us, or let us break your limbs and then carry you back. Choose one of the two." The leader of the Li family's group gave an ultimatum. "I choose the third choice. Let me break your limbs." Chu Mu smiled, revealing his pure white teeth. Under the sunlight, it caused people to involuntarily feel a chill. However, the Li family's group clearly didn't understand what this meant. Thus they attacked. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. "Break his limbs," shouted the leader. He waved his sword, sending out a cyan sword light. The power of wind was extremely dense. With a swoosh, it tore through the sky, killing its way towards Chu Mu. The cyan sword light was the signal to attack. The others also drew their swords, killing their way towards Chu Mu. More than a dozen people besieged Chu Mu from all directions. Everyone in the distance either revealed a regretful or excited smile, as if Chu Mu was about to be seriously injured. Because these people's attacks were aimed at blocking Chu Mu's escape route, and some of them aimed at his limbs. It seemed like they really wanted to break Chu Mu's limbs first. The fiendish grin enlarged in front of his eyes. It was close at hand, as if the outcome was already determined. Chu Mu only smiled. He didn't say anything. He didn't even pull out his sword. Using his finger as a sword, he drew a line in front of his body and stabbed forward. In a split second, the sword light shattered under Chu Mu's sword finger. He stabbed forward. A sharp golden light flickered on his fingertip. As if piercing through the void, the golden sword light pierced through the air and pierced through the shoulder of one of the Nirvana realm cultivators. It was as if he was taking a stroll in the park. He casually avoided the attacks of more than a dozen people from the Li family, causing all of their attacks to miss. Chu Mu used his finger as a sword to counterattack. Every time he raised his finger, the sword would surely injure his opponent. Everyone in the distance was dumbfounded. In their eyes there was only a casual figure. That movement technique seemed to have reached the pinnacle. It was like an antelope hanging its horn, untraceable. Among the spectators there was an old man. Originally, he was just casually watching the show. But now, his eyes narrowed. A bright light flashed in his eyes, and his face revealed an uncontrollable surprise. He exclaimed again and again in his heart, "What exquisite combat skills!" Every move was just right. It could be said to be incomparably exquisite. Not long after, Chu Mu stopped. More than a dozen people were lying around him. Their hands and feet were pierced by his sword finger, and their meridians were shattered. They fell on the ground and struggled while wailing. Their miserable appearance made everyone in the distance shudder. More than a dozen people from the Li family wanted to cripple Chu Mu, but the result was Chu Mu crippling them instead. Such an ending was completely unexpected. Oh no, oh no. This time, he has thoroughly offended the Li family. Only death awaits him. Yeah, he doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Within 1,000 li of Yen Mountain, the Li family was the most powerful. These people who lived here for generations were naturally aware of this. They had a reverence for the Li family that came from their bones. The Li family was the local tyrant of Yen Mountain. What Chu Mu did next made their eyes widen. Their eyeballs nearly fell out of their sockets. They saw Chu Mu flicking his finger, and powerful finger winds pierced through the air. More than a dozen finger winds landed on the dantian of the people on the ground. In an instant, ghostly wails and howls resounded. Cripple, cripple, my cultivation level. My cultivation level, you're so vicious. You crippled my cultivation. If one's limbs were pierced through and their meridians were shattered, one could always recover. However, if one's cultivation was crippled, and it was under the condition that one's dantian was destroyed by a tyrannical external force, it would be impossible to recover unless one had a heavenly treasure. These dozen or so people really had an ordinary status in the Li family. How could the Li family take out a rare treasure to help them recover? Moreover, the premise was that the Li family had such a rare treasure. Even an aristocratic family with 1,000 years of history couldn't take it out. In short, these dozen or so people were truly crippled. Without cultivation, with their limbs crippled, they would soon be abandoned by the Li family. Their hearts were filled with fear. Exquisite skill, ruthless means, a good seedling. The old man nodded. Go back and tell Li Qiufeng that repaying kindness with enmity isn't the way of a 1,000-year-old family. Chu Mu said to the leader, but if he doesn't give up, I'll take whatever means he has. Just don't regret it. His tone was calm, but the content was very domineering. It triggered many thoughts. It seemed to be different from what the Li family members had said. Many curious people wanted to find out more, but when they thought of the Li family's style, they couldn't help but feel afraid. After crippling the Li family members, Chu Mu didn't stay. He quickly left. After all, this was still the Li family's territory. It was best to leave as soon as possible. Otherwise, if the Li family sent out strong cultivators, it would be a big problem. After Chu Mu left, the surrounding crowd quickly dispersed. The old man in the crowd looked in the direction Chu Mu left. After thinking for a while, he followed Chu Mu. The crippled Li family members were lying on the ground. They couldn't stand up at all, let alone return to the Li family to report this. However, this was still the Li family's territory. Moreover, it wasn't far from the Li family. The Li family members who were passing by found them and brought them back to the family after asking a few questions. Li Qiufeng's face was full of anger. He smashed the hard table with his palm. His eyes flashed coldly. A terrifying aura rose from his body, causing the surrounding air to distort. Very good. You have the guts to provoke me and the Li family. If that's the case, then prepare to die. Li Qiufeng's voice was like a cold wind from the north. It almost froze the air in front of him. As the young master of the Li family, Li Qiufeng had a lot of power in the Li family. Therefore, he could mobilize some of the Li family's strong cultivators, especially when the Li family's dignity was challenged, and someone actually crippled the Li family's cultivators in their territory. This kind of thing could easily arouse the hatred of the Li family members. As for how it happened, Li Qiufeng naturally had his own explanation. The Li family members obviously believed their young master's words. Young master, leave this matter to me. I will personally bring back this bastard's head. The Li family's third sky guard said. Then, I'll have to trouble the third sky guard. Li Qiufeng suppressed the murderous intent in his heart, but the coldness in his eyes was incomparably intense. But third sky guard, capture this bastard alive and bring him back to the Li family. I want to put him on trial. Don't worry, young master. The third sky guard sneered, as if Chu Mu was already a prisoner. Then, the third sky guard led a group of powerful Li family's third sky guard and quickly left the Li family, chasing after Chu Mu. Li Qiufeng looked out of the Li family's residence with his hands behind his back. His face was cold. Soon, Li Qiuran also learned of this matter, and came to find Li Qiufeng. Little sister, now you know. I only sent people to invite him back, but he ruthlessly crippled their cultivation and limbs. This kind of person. Li Qiufeng sneered. Li Qiuran was silent. In the end, she and Chu Mu were just strangers who met by chance. To be more precise, he saved her life. Yet she had no understanding of him. What kind of person he was, what kind of goal he had, and what kind of ulterior motives he had for the Li family. Regardless, Li Qiuran was a member of the Li family, and she believed in them. Now that they were crippled, Li Qiuran hated Chu Mu even more. Although Chu Mu didn't know that the Li family had already dispatched experts to capture him alive, he still had a bad premonition. Therefore, he increased his speed and flew through the air, quickly leaving Yen Mountain's boundary.